Check 1, 2.
Testing 1, 2.
There are no storms at this committee, except when we're talking about snow removal. I said except when we're talking about snow removal. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the Transportation Committee. We have quorum in the room, so I will run through the agenda. If there are matters that you wish held, please let me know. So regrets Councillor Tierney is away in beautiful Thunder Bay today for FCM, so he won't be with us today. There are no declarations of interest received. Confirmation of minutes from February 5th, 2014. Confirmed? Okay. Number one on the agenda is a report from City Operations on traffic control device initiatives. It's an information report received.
No. I have a question.
Number two is also an information report on pedestrian crossing.
Hold.
Item number three is the Lansdowne Transportation Monitoring Program, again an information report.
Carried.
Okay. Then stop holding things. I'm not sure what that means, but we'll find out. So IPDs previously distributed, received, and that's noted in the agenda.
Quick question on the first item A.
Traffic control boxes?
Yes.
How quick is it?
It's 2 seconds.
Okay, why don't we do that now before we get to the main agenda then?
So I really think the traffic control box anti-graffiti vinyl wrap pilot project is a good one, and I think in the report, in the information provided, it speaks of targeting areas where there is graffiti. I'm wondering if that list can be discussed with local councillors. I know that in a lot of urban areas, that's what, when you look at the numbers, especially of complaints, we are the ones mainly affected. So I wonder if the strategy in this one will start, and if we're going to see things this spring.
Through the chair, yes, we can make that list available, and we'll start the rollout in the spring.
And there was a comment from various communities downtown that, yes, the O-Train logo or sticker was fine, but wondering if wayfinding signs, in terms of a map, if a map could be printed on that plastic to allow some local wayfinding, if that could be done.
Through the chair, we'd talk to the communications people and see if something like that could be mocked up for consideration.
Great, thank you.
Yes, Councillor Schmidt.
I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment, perhaps a bit of both. While I've noted the success in deterring graffiti on the boxes themselves, certainly in the same areas that typically had a lot of graffiti, it's not clear whether that hasn't just transferred. Someone who's out with a can of paint who wants to tag may be hitting somewhere else and avoiding the boxes now that we have these wraps. Is that something we've done any kind of evaluation of or plan to?
Through the chair, yes, we've evaluated the creep, as we call it. The creep is down. One thing through the pilot, we wrapped, because it was a limited pilot, oftentimes there's more than one box at an intersection, so part of the rollout of the extension would be to finish up wrapping the boxes that are at those locations and then look at the other high-hit locations. The rest of the creep that's maybe happening in the immediate area, the best way to deal with that is just quick eradication.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll move to the main agenda then, and the first item was traffic control device initiatives, and that was held by Councillor Boros.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick questions, and want to make sure we're all going forward on the same wavelength here. So, Phil, thanks for bringing in the pilot last year and providing us with an update on it in terms of how to move forward. I just want to clarify two things. you indicate in there we're just going to basically repeat the same locations as last year. Is that, if I read this correctly?
Through you, Chair, yes, that's correct.
Yeah. But you're giving us the option, and for instance, there are other streets that you and I have gone back and forth on, or your staff have gone back and forth on, that obviously we want to see these implemented. So, and I know you're recommending, or you're suggesting that we can use our own budgets, and I'm quite prepared to do that. But in terms of, I think your staff have been working on some alternatives in terms of different signage, or maybe adapting the signage to suit the type of road. Are we moving forward on that, or are we sticking with the same signs? Like, in other words, some of the ones where we have transitions in speed or wider streets, maybe putting the actual speed limit on those flex signs. Is that option now exist?
Yes, it is, because there's locations that weren't near parks or near schools. So what we would do there is we'll just put the regulatory speed limit on those signs.
Right. And in terms of charging back to our budgets, is it a flat rate, itemized rate? Because in some cases I have longer stretches of road that are affected.
Yeah, it'd be based on we'll review and do a plan for each location, and then we'll provide you with the cost.
The other point I just want to make, and where you've indicated in the report, you've done the speed surveys, and the difference in speeds, for instance, in the one that I'm most interested in, is very minimal. But there's a perception issue. There's a perception, I think, that creates a greater value to these zones than what the report really lets on. And I'm thinking of, where we've got parks and school zones, because people do become more aware. Like, I'm totally in favor of what you've done here, and I think we need to expand this, and we need to find money in the next budgets to do more of this. But I don't know if you've had a chance to look at sort of the intangible benefits of doing this program.
Yeah, one of the things we noticed was with the compliance to the speed limit. So if you look on the page, table 2 in the report, it talked about, where you had the 40 kilometers an hour speed limit, the compliance, or the number of people actually driving at that speed limit was very low. So although we did see some speed reductions of between 3 and 5 or 6 kilometers an hour, we did see an increase with compliance, which is, from a safety perspective, a very good thing, because it means more people are adhering to the speed limit.
Yeah. Well, what I was afraid of, that somebody would dismiss the program because they'd say, in one case I'm looking at here, the one that's of most interest to me, there's only a difference of 3 kilometers an hour by the time people adapted to it later in the season. But there is like I say, that perception, that intangible, that's harder to measure, that I think makes this program worthwhile.
Yeah, it's also a reminder to people that they're another signal as they're approaching a park or a school or the speed limit.
And so I'm assuming in future budgets, because we've missed the boat on this one, in future budgets you will bring forward a recommendation for increasing the funding for this?
Yeah, there was a direction when we did this report in December to come back at the next budget with how we would fund this, so we'll be providing that during the budget.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah, I was looking at table number 2 as well, and because there's 2 streets which even after removal are at 93% compliance and 94% compliance, I was just wondering, why are we going to put it back there again when we have other streets which are obviously more of a problem? Shouldn't we be saying, because the budget's the same, that we should at least add 2 new areas and take those out, because that is not an area where you're having serious problems with speeding?
We would work with the ward councillor to identify if there's a location on the list where we did the pilot last year, and the feeling is that it's not required there, or there's other, we can look at relocating that location to another location.
I'm not even saying
it
necessarily in the same ward. I think it should be the most serious ones in the city.
Okay. Well, the pilot we did was for the ward, and again, that would be we'll be bringing forward through the budget process how we would fund this in the future. And that could be something that we could look at through that process.
Because you don't have all wards covered, and some wards have 2. I mean,
no, and what we've committed to doing is the wards that we didn't do last year, we'll be doing this year. So we'll be working with the ward councillor to identify the location where they want this to be installed. So the plan would be then at the end of, by the end of the spring, we'd have one in every ward.
Question I had, you did Halton in my area, but you only did it by 1 school, and there's 2 schools on Halton. It's a long street. And I had people complaining to me, how come you're doing it by the public school and not by the French school?
Well, the locations were identified based on the issues with regards to speeding. I mean, we had before data, and we'd also, the locations from last year were also looked at from
Well,
area
there were more
traffic
complaints
management.
from one school than the other,
Yeah.
there's no question about that, but I think the speeding problem is the same rail, that whole road has.
Okay.
So is there any way you can extend it a little bit on an existing road, or?
Well, we can work with the office to see what we can do there, and see what's
And,
possible.
There was a sort of a game that was coming by the end, which was to go down and go slalom through and knock them over. Are you having much problem with that?
Well, we haven't had that. The one thing with these flexible states is that they actually, when they do get hit, they pop back up.
Yeah, I know.
And I'm not aware of any location where the stakes actually came off.
Oh, they didn't come off, they just were having
Yeah.
some fun with
We,
it.
I hadn't heard that, but again, that'd be something we wouldn't be
But
promoting.
it does seem to have helped a bit. The other little question, I've got a study going on in one of my streets right now, which is supposed to end early this year. If they come up with recommendations to do things like this, does that mean they'd have to wait until next year for funding?
Is it a study done through Public Works, or is it a...
It's done through the planning department.
Yeah, so we do work with them, and I'm not sure what, I don't know if
It's
Vivi's here.
one of these, there's on, and it's specifically on speeding, so.
Yeah. Again, I'd have to, someone from Plan Growth Management, I'm not sure if they've got funds to actually implement, so if they did, then it would be done through that. If not, we would have to fund it another way.
I don't know, I've got two of those little things that flash the numbers, and for some reason, somebody's taken their, they weren't working. They've taken them, the backing is still there, they've taken the front off. Is that,
Oh, the speed display boards?
yeah?
Yeah, so, yeah, they're probably just getting recharged, and then we would either put them back there, or we can work with your office if you've got, I think you've got more
They
than...
weren't up very long and they stopped working, so I don't know.
we'll follow up and get back to you on what
Because they're
happened there.
both gone. Okay. And the third one is, I don't know if it's in yet or not, but it's going to be a portable one. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Codry. Your concerns were addressed by the questions. Okay. Councillor Fleury, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Philippe, moi j'ai des questions. Je pense que le projet est super bon. On a vu les résultats, surtout sur l'avenue Montfort. Je veux peut-être reculer un peu à l'arrière. Donc, c'est quoi le lien avec ces projets pilotes-là, puis ce que le conseiller Peter Hume avait fait? Parce que ce qu'on avait vu au niveau des stratégies que Peter Hume avait fait, c'est on voulait reconsidérer puis essayer de voir si c'était applicable à l'échelle de la ville, puisque pas tous les quartiers avaient accès à ce budget-là. Alors, j'aimerais ça que tu commentes un peu là-dessus avant peut-être le reste des questions.
Ben, le conseiller Hume avait mis en œuvre des modifications pour les marques de chaussée de 50 km ou 40 km/h, aussi avec les poteaux. Alors, ce qu'on avait fait, on a travaillé avec eux. J'ai rencontré avec des conseillers pour leur montrer exactement ce qu'on avait fait et ce qui est arrivé, et les progrès qu'on a eus. Alors, ce sont des mesures qu'on peut mettre en place dans d'autres quartiers. Alors, c'est juste de nous parler exactement des endroits, puis on peut en discuter pour voir si on peut implémenter. La seule question, c'est on n'a pas l'argent dans notre budget pour faire ça, alors ça devrait venir du budget du conseiller pour ce temps maintenant.
So, I'm still unsure about what you're saying relating to the items used by Councillor Hume. So, Councillor Hume had a various portfolio of strategies. When you read the report, it's unclear if all these strategies are considered in the kit, if you will, in the overall strategies.
Yeah, this report was more to report back on what we've done last year with regards to the pilot. The strategies that Councillor Hume had provided, the studies did show that the putting the speed limit on with paint on the road seemed to be effective. So that's something that's now in our toolbox, and I know there's some councils that will be putting those things in place in their ward. So again, we're evaluating all those, and we'll be evaluating the ones we install this year. And if there's other measures that we see or that we hear of, or that if councillors see and want us to look at, we can evaluate and pilot on local residential streets.
Yeah, I'm wondering and concerned about, we're recognizing, I think, from every perspective, from the political, but also from your end, from staff, that these strategies are adequate in responding to some of the community concerns about speeding and about slowing down traffic. But we seem to say, well, look, it's not funded and it needs to come from a pot somehow. So I wonder if you could comment on that. I mean, Councillor Blois in the past has as clearly said, look, we had $30,000. These were the strategies that would enable us to do these things. I'd like to hear from you on that. We don't anymore. No, I recognize that. But you've talked about it in the past.
Yeah, and that's something that we'll be bringing forward in our report when the budget's submitted as to how we move forward with that. One option as part of the next term of council is to identify some funds through there that could be used for the ward. So again, we'll get the details out and provide that prior to the budget deliberation for next year.
Well, I think it's important. It's also important to set up frameworks, not warrants, but frameworks around when these should be implemented, because we have to have a strategy, because you can put them on every street, and then what's the overall purpose? We're trying to respond to community concerns and key types of situation, as noted in the report. Two-lane roads seem to work easier in terms of line painting and post. Maybe on the funding topic, I'm wondering how closely you work with other departments, and I'm thinking of the Better Neighborhoods grant, where we would have seen application, for example, in my area around Chapel Street, where intersections were to be, one of the proposals was intersections were to be painted mural style to slow down the traffic. Is that something that you were able to work within the various departments to enable that, since you recognize that strategy is effective?
Yeah, and that's something that, I know the example you gave there, we've worked with them to develop sort of a criteria where you could do that type of marking on the roadway. So we do work with them, and it's something that we can work in the future with for these type of strategies.
And what's the, relating to just the budgeting elements, what's the actual cost? So we have existing staff, we have existing paint.
The cost is to purchase the signs themselves, the posts, and also the cost to go and install the paint. So those are basically the costs, and it runs between $1,300 and $1,500.
Right.
So depending on the number of signs, how long the length and things like that. If a road already had yellow paint on it, then it's not. So we have to take, it's case by case, but that's sort of the average we found over the last year.
And then is there a strategy for the department to buy bulk for the plastic posts? Because there do seem to be a lot more of them, and they seem to be very effective. You speak about them in the report, and we see them on the Lowry Bridge last winter, for example, last summer, sorry. They worked really effectively, so I wonder if there's a strategy to purchase more of those.
Well, for last year, we went for a request for quotes, and we got, but as you know, if this becomes more sustainable, and we may look at different purchasing strategies to ensure that we're doing efficient purchase of these devices.
Okay. Just a general comment. If these are working effectively, we need to elaborate a strategy, and we need to find a funding mechanism. In my mind, I've said that in the past, I say it again, I don't think that councillors' office budgets should be subsidizing this strategy. It seems to work, so we need to prioritize it, and we need to fund it. So it's not your fault per se, but we are, as Councillor Blois would say, we need to see that come up in the budget discussion, and we need to prioritize it, especially if they can improve the quality of life in the various neighborhoods. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Deans, please.
Thank you very much. I had one of these in my ward, and I think it met with a little bit of mixed review from the community. But this was a pilot, and I guess my concern here is how we do an effective evaluation of the program and know where we should be going with this next. If this is a success, and some of my colleagues have characterized it as a success. In my ward, it seems to have had a very nominal impact on the street that it was on. But I actually think there are probably streets in my ward that I've been thinking about that would be a better candidate because of the width of the street and the length of the street and the speeds that cars can get up on those streets. So I guess my issue is the evaluation, the scientific approach to the evaluation. How do we do that to guide us in what streets make the most sense? And the other part is we haven't asked the communities that were host to these installations their opinion. So why wouldn't we, since this is a pilot, why wouldn't we be asking for community feedback on the effectiveness?
So these locations were identified based on the speed data that we had. So we saw that we were getting calls from residents, from councillors, and when we did the studies to determine was there actually a speeding problem with regards to what the posted speed limit is and what was actually operating, that we found that there was some issues with regards to higher than related speeds. So that's how these locations got identified. With regards to the consultation, we did put, in some instances, there was the council wanted to put flyers out to let people know this was happening. And as part of that, there was a feedback mechanism where they can contact us or the councillor to provide their comments. And we did receive feedback. I know in your ward, after I think the first day was installed, there was we had to do some adjustments because of parking. And so we continue to get feedback. We didn't get that much. We didn't proactively go out there, but our thought is if it was really an issue with people not thinking it was effective or useful, we would get that feedback. Normally we don't get feedback when something seems to be working or people are pleased about it.
What I would like to do is I would like to go out and survey the street. If you could provide me with a survey that would make sense, I would happily go and deliver that onto the street to seek the input of the people that live there about the effectiveness before we put them back in. And I would also like to test a different style of street. Instead of having the same one again this year, I'd actually like to move it over to like a Queensdale, Kingsdale, one of those really long, wide streets that we've had continuing challenges with, to see if the makeup of the street actually changes the results, because these results are a bit all over the place too in their effectiveness. So because this is a pilot, I just think we need to take a more scientific approach to it, and I'm wondering if you've given any thought to how we might go about that.
Yeah, and we can prepare a survey for you that gets and we can distribute to the residents on that street. We can also work with you if you feel and the residents don't want it on that street and there's consensus, and you want to move to another street as a pilot, we can do that as well. And there would be no additional cost because the materials are already there.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Caudry, back on the list.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just a comment and a question. First of all, at the start of the year, I think the City Council, through governance, put a motion forward, and I think I've already asked you this question through communication between you and I, about councillors' budgets being spent on city department operations, to do projects like this. And that was raised back a little while, saying that we should not be using our constituents' budgets for projects like this because it sort of creates imbalance, if you want to call it that, or advantages for one councillor versus another area. So having said that, what are your thoughts on that? Why are we doing this way now when through governance we had said no, we weren't going to use any of the constituents' office money? Maybe you can answer, maybe
I was going to say,
Deputy City Clerk may be able to answer that.
Chair, the councillor is correct. Any transfer to city operations needs to be done by motion of council.
So that it would require a motion from this committee to council to going forward in order to have that.
Committee could do a motion to make a blanket exemption from the policy. I think that it would have to be still in keeping with the policy so that you don't reopen it. So in other words, the thinking behind the policy is that you don't add ongoing operating pressures to city departments without council motion. If, for example, traffic ops said, no, this is not an ongoing pressure, we can do this and it's not going to add to our budget, you could apply that exemption without reopening the policy.
Thank you very much, Ms. Donnelly. And then you said, Mr. Landry, that next budget you will make accommodations in that budget going forward for projects like this.
Yeah, we'll be providing a recommendation on how to move forward. And at this point, once the devices are installed, there's no additional pressure or budget pressure with regards to reinstalling every year.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I would ask my colleague, Councillor Blows, to move a motion on this item to say that for this year's budget, we open up some of the move the motion at council in order to allow us to do that. So
to allay my colleague's concerns, and I'm actually very pleased that he brought this up because otherwise we might have been floundering. Just happen to have a motion here that that the deputy clerk happened to prepare, and I'll read it out to you. And if members wish to approve this, whereas council expense policy requires that funds transferred to city operations from a member's constituency services budget be accomplished by a council motion, and whereas council has approved such expenditures when asked, and whereas members recognize that the intent of the expense policy is to ensure members do not add to ongoing operating budget pressures without council consent, therefore be it resolved the Transportation Committee recommend that City Council approve an amendment to council expense policy that would permit members to purchase those traffic control measures that staff agree will not add ongoing budget pressures without the need for a motion. And I'm going to say, I told you so.
Thank you for introducing the motion. I'm looking to legal because we had a discussion earlier about another one. Since we're turning this from an information piece into an action piece, is this not a two-step process, Mr. Nahas?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we'll need a vote of two-thirds to add it to the agenda and then a simple majority to pass.
We seem to have a dispute from the clerk's office. So,
Mr. Chair, this is not an information previously distributed item which would require two-thirds. This is an information report that is on the agenda. So what will happen at this point, if it were an information report, it would simply be received by this committee. What happens is if this motion is moved, this becomes an action report automatically and simply rises to council. That is the only difference. There is no need for two-thirds for this, for an information report that is properly on the agenda. This is not an information previously distributed report.
okay, that's fine then. So we'll finish up. There's some other people with questions or comments, and then we'll call the vote on the motion. Yes. I just want to go through the balance of the questions first, Councillor. Councillor Chernyshenko.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to draw some particular attention to what was accomplished on Bronson Avenue. As you know, a year ago or over the last couple of years, there's been concern followed by a plan and some action. I'm pleased to see that the relatively modest initiatives that were taken, what amounts to essentially making, adjusting placement of some existing cycle lanes and putting up the flexible posts, making the intersections more clear, has resulted in pretty significant decrease in the speeds recorded here, to which I want to praise staff and the community members who were involved in coming up with that list of what we thought would be effective and pretty quick to implement initiatives. They seem to be working. My question's twofold. One is, have we noted, I guess first thing would be, have we monitored, and if we have, would we be able to say whether this has led to increasing congestion, or have we managed to accomplish these speed reductions without creating unwanted new congestion?
At this point, we haven't noticed any increased congestion. There hasn't been increased delays from what we can tell.
That's certainly been my observation, and the comment Councillor Deans made, I believe it was, when we hear in your conversation back and forth, we certainly hear when people don't like things, when we take steps and they're not popular. My characterization in 3 years and a bit in this office is when we get praise, it probably means a lot of people really do like it, because most people don't take the time to send us praise, not as much as we'd like. And I've received quite a bit of positive feedback directly to my office about these initiatives. People feel a lot safer. They feel that this has made a significant difference. The other question would be, is what we've done on Bronson something that could be readily explored now on other streets? Is this something that you intend to become fairly common practice as the opportunities arise?
I think we'd want to take a look at those streets and sort of do an analysis to see if that would be the best measure to do, depending on the environment, the operating speeds, and those kind of things. So I think this is a good learning experience from us, because even last year when we spoke about this, we weren't sure if they would be effective. I think some of the measures that were put in place did, especially at the northern end with the canal. crossing the canal did improve things. So again, it's another thing that we can put into our toolbox to look at when we look at other locations.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further, Councillor Clark has a question.
It's pounding this, it doesn't register over there, and since you never turn your head in this direction, in any event, I don't blame you. I do not understand Councillor Blois's motion. I understand that, and I understand why I did it. I also understand that I turned back $77,000 this year, and frankly, if I'd have thought about it, I might have spent more on what are known euphemically as operating budgets. You know, the trouble is we spend a lot of time cracking the shells on peanuts and letting some of the bigger things get away, and that worries me a little bit when the focus gets down to this level. We have done some work around the corner at Coventry by the shopping center, and generally speaking, I think that that kind of line painting and sort of trying to direct pedestrians to the right way has had reasonable impact. What worries me is that if we do these things, for example, put a PXO in based on a councillor's budget, the operating impact probably couldn't be described as in percentages. You say if we installed, for example, a PXO, you have to put new lights in when the light bulbs go out and things like that, but you say there's no operating impact?
There's no operating impacts with the devices that we used in the pilots. Now, when you talk about a PXO or a traffic light, that's a different story because you have ongoing electrical costs, you have maintenance costs, we have requirements with regards to minimum maintenance, so those costs are there.
Yeah, but PXOs would also have some ongoing maintenance.
Yeah, PXOs would have, it's similar to a traffic signal. It would have ongoing yearly maintenance costs.
And these little yellow flex things, did they ever break?
The ones that haven't broken, I'm not aware of any breaking this in the last one. Now, if they do break as we move forward, again, we're going to be bringing forward a strategy on how to potentially fund this in the future. And if that's the case, then it would just get funded out of that work.
Yeah, it's in a perfect world, nothing would ever happen. It has to go back to it. I've seen these on my neighbors' roadways and say, who did that? But I'm told that they have had some successful results. When I look at these tables here, in particular the one on report 1, the impact is 0, more or less.
And I can maybe give the one on Kittiwake, and that was something that we learned as through this process. Kittiwake is it's a wide road, it's about 12 meters in width, and what we found is as the roads got wider that it was less effective. So this year we're actually going to go in and put some posts about 1.5 meters from the side of the road to try to narrow it to see if that has an impact. So again, that's sort of the learning process of these types of devices, and we've noted that. So if in the future we come on a road that's very wide, we'll hopefully this year will show that it's been effective, and we'll have that strategy to deal with that.
Yeah, I think that if we're looking at complete streets as a reasonable council policy, then I think the notion that kind of thing tends to fit the complete streets model as well. Is that accurate?
It would be, these are more the short term where we don't have the funds to actually build the complete streets where you've got the narrower roads and things like that. So this is sort of I see maybe a stopgap measure with regards to what we have, what we can do today versus what we can potentially do in the future.
Okay.
So again, I don't see any further questions on the report, so we'll move into discussion and debate on the motion itself. And I'd like to start that off with a question, Phil. The three main pieces are the flexible boards, portable speed signs, and also the pavement painting. And so my question is to give this motion some context. as those are the three biggest tools in the toolbox, so to speak, would any of those cause an additional pressure on your budget if the councillor picked up the cost of the paint or the board or whatever the equipment is?
No, we already have staff now that goes out and puts out the boards, the speed boards, and then the costs to install and reinstall are done by our signs of pavement crews, and they're already out in the field in those areas, so it's not a cost to do that.
So those big three, so to speak, they would be covered by Councillor Blos's motion? Yep. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Is anybody, Councillor Wilkinson?
Yeah, I mean, we've been already buying the speed bollards. I've got 3 of them now, and we didn't need a motion like this to do that because we paid for them directly from our office budget. We didn't give you the money to buy them. You found them for us, and the money we paid for them directly out of our office budget. So it's just, is it just a way of where you pay from it that's the issue here, or is it?
Sorry, I'll let
I'm just trying to understand
Ms.
that, because I don't think we did anything illegal when we're getting, because a lot of us have done that.
Mr. Chair, the expense policy came into effect July 1st, so anything that was purchased in advance did not require a council motion. Anything that's been done after, Councillor Hume brought a report to committee. Now, I will say I did grant an exemption to those that were bought after the last council meeting in December because there was not time to go to council for a motion, and council has always approved this as an expenditure. So there were 2 offices that took advantage of that of that particular window. This motion would make it much clearer as to council's intent.
So the one I bought in December was one of those 2 then?
That's correct.
Okay. Because it was just the same as before, and okay, so then the motion would be necessary to do that. I think we may have to look at changing the policy in a way for some things too, because we could get awfully bureaucratic and having to get motions all the time to do small stuff. So I would accept this one for this year, but I think could I ask Mr. Chair if the staff could take a look at that part of the policy and see if there's some ways it could be streamlined so that we don't end up spending all our time on paperwork and not on actually putting the money into something kind of useful.
I think that's good direction. I'm going to direct this question to the clerk. Is this motion even necessary to do what's been going on so far?
Yes, it is, because it does require a motion. I am allowed to grant exemptions for really good reasons. My reason in December was the fact that there was no council meeting. These requests were made after the last council meeting in December, so we couldn't do it out of the year-end funds. We will, as always, review the expense policy as part of the governance package when we do our interviews with each of you this summer. But this motion, yes, to accomplish what's been considered normal practice in terms of purchasing speed boards and painting lines, then yes, we would request this. Otherwise, you need motions.
So what you're saying is for anything done prior to this motion, there's a blanket amnesty? Is that what you're saying?
If it has not been brought to your attention, there are no issues.
Thank you. Okay, so anybody else wish to speak to the motion? Yes. Councillor Clark.
Well, as the person that added money to the capital cost of a east-west bikeway along Hemlock to create breaks in the traffic, at the suggestion of staff, they didn't have enough money, so I added some money. And I went through the Transportation Committee and the Council to get approval to do that. And I don't think it was onerous. I still don't think it was onerous. On the other hand, buying those little yellow data loggers, you stick them up on a post and try to minimal traffic calming, but at least you have a record of how fast they're going. I didn't go to Council, and nor did I think it was necessary. Yet I think there would be some operating costs for somebody to go and install them, but they're doing that anyway. It's just a question of how many locations they want to operate on. So my concern is that this current expense policy doesn't need this amendment, so I won't be supporting it.
Councillor Wilkinson, Councillor Clark still has the mic.
I guess I would seek clarification from staff as to whether I need to go to council. Not that I would be upset going to council. I have no problem doing that. I like to get around and give you guys the benefit of being able to take shots.
Okay, Councillor Deans, I believe you're next on the list.
Well, I'm not sure how I'm going to vote.
Councillor Deans, sorry, Councillor Flory is right. Deputy Clerk, can you explain again why this motion is necessary in the current context?
Council expense policy was made a blanket rule that any transfer from members' constituency services budget to city operations would have to be done by motion. This particular amendment means that these traffic control devices, which do not have an impact on traffic operations operating budget, could simply be done now with an exemption. The motions for example, traffic signals or pedestrian crossings would still require a motion or a council report because there is an ongoing impact to the city's operating budget. So if you don't approve Councillor Blois's motion, you will still have to do these expenditures by way of motion. So in other words, if you want speed boards, you would have to go to do a motion. That is what the expense policy says. It's not nuanced.
No, he's trying to make it easier. Councillor Deans.
So to the Deputy City Clerk, if we vote in favor of Councillor Blois's motion, that would be to the end of this term. It wouldn't be in perpetuity because one council doesn't bind the next, right?
We would be bringing this as an amendment to the expense policy as part of governance. This notion, and you would all be re-interviewed as you always are on all of the policies, and we will bring forward a permanent change.
Okay. Because I understand why Councillor Blois would like to go ahead with this at this point, but fundamentally I don't think that constituency budgets, our office budgets, should be used for city operations. City operations budgets should be used for city operations, and the councillors that maybe have more discretion in their budgets shouldn't have more opportunity for these sorts of things than councillors like Councillor Holmes in a downtown ward that's really busy that wouldn't have the flexibility. It just doesn't seem like, from a principal perspective, this is not the way to fund city operations through our budgets. Okay, so everybody agrees. So, see, the problem I have is, in the short term, okay, fine, it's not in the budget, you want to get on with it, I understand that, and I would be willing to support it, but I guess I don't want to create the impression to the Deputy City Clerk that this is a policy change that we want, because I don't want the policy change. I'd rather not starve your budget, fund the budget properly, than have this come out in perpetuity out of councillors' budgets. So that's my issue, and I think Councillor Blois is going to make an amendment to it.
Yeah. So just to be clear, well, let me just to address that. We'll amend it by saying to the end of this term. I think that was the understanding, and any governance changes that come forward from the clerk's office are not for this term, anyways. They're for the following term. And I would say again, I told you so in the first year of this term.
No, and I think that's a reasonable amendment. Councillor Flory.
My point was exactly the one that Councillor Deans brought up, is that we should properly fund the programs that we believe should be done, and they shouldn't be funded through our offices. If we're doing it as a measure right now to help us for this season, fine. But as a strategy going forward, as a long-term strategy to actually invest in traffic calming in communities, this is not the way to do it.
More comment.
Well, actually, Councillor Caudry was next on the list. Councillor Caudry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. That's exactly the point. Right now what's happening, because since we made the change in July, What is happening right now is councillors are going back to the city department and asking to purchase equipment from their office budget. What I am saying that we've already made that commitment not to do that going forward. And that is why this motion says, at least for now, change that policy so it creates an even playing field for everyone. In the future, we will go back to whatever the recommendations are through the governance process. This is strictly to create, solve an imbalance currently. Because when I was approached to pay money out of my office budget, I asked Mr. Laundrie, hey, can I do that legally? Because of the governance review that we just did in July, to say, no, you can't do that. You can't take money out of your budgets in order to promote your ward, in a sense, by creating extra project that the department did not plan for in their budget. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Boss. I hate to do this, but at the beginning of this term, this committee actually made the right decision. And thanks to a report that came forward from staff, they gave that latitude within their budget, and the vast majority of this committee approved that. We wouldn't be here talking about our own budgets and about nickels and dimes, and this gets embarrassing when you do this. The motion that's being amended or has been amended by the clerk's office basically says to the end of this term, it'll be taken into account next term in the governance, and at that point, anybody who's around this table and around the budget table, we wouldn't be having this debate if we had followed through on what this committee did in the first place, which was the right thing, which got nixed by the mayor's office at council at budget time. So there you go. It comes back to haunt us. Thank you.
Anybody else want to speak to the motion? Okay, we'll call the vote. Carried? Carried. Thank you. And report received? Received. Okay. Pedestrian crossing is the next agenda item, and again, it was held by Councillor Bois.
Thank you. Well, I think frustration is starting to bubble over on this, because I think Councillor Fleury was on the right track, all the other councillors when they pushed. Where's the province on this? We say we're still continuing to work with them. I think every state in the United States obviously values their pedestrians more than we do.
Just to give the committee an update on this, we've been working with the province and other municipalities over the last 6 months, and I'm pleased to report that there's a final report that's nearing completion, and in it talks about providing a unsignalized pedestrian crossing, as well as sort of something between the existing PXO and the sign, where we would have some flashing lights above the sign itself, just to be more conspicuous. So the plan would be to finalize the report in the next month, and MTO will review that, and our hope is that by late summer, early fall, that the regulations would be changed to allow for their use in Ontario.
I just want to thank you for this, because I think your frustration equals ours on this file, so thank you. And the sooner, the safer.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Is part of that going to be that they do in other provinces, that when they have the diagonal lines, that the cars will have to stop for the pedestrians rather than the pedestrians having to wait till it's clear, which sometimes is difficult?
Yeah, the way the signs would work, similar to other provinces and states, is there would be the white sign with a black silhouette of a pedestrian, and the pedestrian, when they were there showing that they were going to cross the street, a vehicle would have to stop, similar to what we have in Ontario at PXOs, although we don't have them here in Ottawa. And we would also have crosswalks with zebra markings on the road to, again, show that it's a right-of-way for pedestrians.
It's one of the places where these could be very useful are at the roundabouts, where they actually have placed the diagonal signs, and some cars are stopping because they're used to them, and others are not. So when these come in to place, are you going to be doing a major information campaign to try to make sure that drivers do stop? Because sometimes pedestrians don't wait that moment to make sure they're going to stop. They just step right out. I've seen that happen in places, and it's really dangerous.
Yeah, that's part and package, and we'll be working with the province because we want a consistent message across the province. And then we would have a campaign here in Ottawa, which would include, if it's in a community, probably flyers within that area to let people know. Also, probably signs and approach to these crossings for the first little while, just to let them know that for vehicles that, by the way, you have the right of way, but also letting pedestrians know that you just can't start walking across the street. You have to wait till a car can stop, because if you have a car that's 10 meters from the crossing and the pedestrian shows up, the car can't stop.
And will you be able to do this in mid-block crossings as well? So I've got a street where you cross, where there's no road, to a pathway that goes to school. I have a crossing guard there. That would help protect her.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Well, although with the crossing guard, if it's marked there, it's the same protections right now.
But the cars don't recognize it just has the two lines. It really needs the other ones in there, and it's not as easy as you think.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just coming back to I've got two questions related to this item. First of all, the existing crosswalks that are in existence in some communities, including mine, that, I've been told over the years they're not legal based on the HTA. What are we going to do with those crosswalks? Are we going to paint them or repaint them? Or are we going to put different signals on them?
Well, for those crosswalks, we would put in the proper signage with the proper markings to make it a legal crossing device.
So, in other words, they will be treated in the same fashion as anything new coming in?
Yeah, and we want consistency across the city, so we'll be using the new, what's in the regulations and the appropriate signage.
In terms of consistency that you speak about, the consistency in terms of warrant systems. Warrant system, I know, are a provincial mandate. Having said that, my concern is that in terms of achieving warrant systems, in terms of a traffic signal or a stop sign or a pedestrian crosswalk, seem to differ between urban, suburban, and rural. And the reason why I say differ is because in an urban area, those warrants are much easier to attain than in the suburban wards, where you don't have that much traffic in certain cases, but you have a lot of pedestrian traffic. Would that pedestrian corridor traffic take precedent over any warrants required, or is there a warrant system for that?
As part of the work that's being done right now is that they are looking at sort of guidelines as to when and where they should be installed, so that would take into context. So again, for a traffic signal, there's a certain amount of traffic and pedestrian volumes and things like that to justify it, and as you move down the chain of different types of devices, the thresholds become less and less. The goal would be then you get to the least, which would be just the sign, which would be more used on local residential streets where your volumes are very low, and that kind of aspect. So those will be things that we'll be looking at, and as part of in 2015, we were planning to bring forward a more comprehensive report back on just all the warrants with regards to signals, multi-way stops, and then we would add this in there, and we could bring that for a presentation and discussion at that time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Landry, and thank you for your response. I just want to take the opportunity to thank Councillor Fleury for putting this item back on the table, because it has been a concern, at least in my ward, for a number of years, and I'm sure across the city. So thank you, Councillor Fleury, for putting it up.
And Councillor Fleury, you had a comment.
Multiple questions, Mr. Chair. I want to understand, with the report that you've proposed, I understand the costs are very similar between a PXO and an actual light signal, but based on the discussion we've had with the province, especially MTO, I think it would show good faith for us to bring it back as a tool that we can use, even if we realize that financially if we're going to go that way, we better bite the bullet and go an extra 20 grand to bring in the full signalized elements. So it's unclear to me in the report if that's the proposed route, is to bring it as an option. It becomes part of our toolkit. Maybe we never use it, or maybe we do, but at least we show good faith to MTO, understanding that we need them to change the Highway Traffic Act regulations.
Yeah, and the PXOs, and you can read that in the report, they're not utilized much in the province anymore, although I think with this new sign that's being proposed, it's a different type of, they're still calling it a PXO, but a different category. This will take over what the old PXOs were. The costs for the PXOs are close to about, I think, $50,000 to $75,000 in that range, depending on the location. But these signs, the most basic type of device that we'll be able to use in the future is just basically putting up a couple of signs and some pavement markings. So we're talking maybe $1,000 to $2,000. And it graduates if we decide on a location where we want to put these flashing lights that are right above the sign. So that'll be a little more increase, but it won't be to the range of where we see right now with the PXOs.
So based on your feedback, I understand, but is it, again, just to show goodwill? Because right now when we're having discussions with the MTO, every time they bring back is that your council would have the authority to bring back PXOs, and that was the catch point in terms of having other discussions. So can we bring it back? Are you comfortable if we do a quick amendment to bring this back, a PXO as a possible tool used in the toolkit? So then when we engage in other types of discussion, they can't hold us to that one and say, well, City of Ottawa, you can do this through the PXO tool, if you will.
I would suggest that we would wait until we bring forward the report next year. One of the things that we would have to do if we did bring it back is there'll be a major education campaign. It's been over almost 20 years since the last PXO was installed in Ottawa, and I'm not sure a lot of people would actually know what to do. So as part of this new device that's going to be coming out, we'll be doing an extensive education campaign. So if anything, if we were to use it potentially in the future, it should be tied into all that. So that would be my recommendation.
So you're basically saying let's continue and no, but is the MTO in terms of discussion still holding on to the City of Ottawa not allowing PXOs?
They haven't mentioned that. I mean, I think other than Toronto and a few other cities, no one really is using PXOs anymore in Ontario. So I think when this device comes in, it'll be the go-to device versus the PXO because it's a lot more affordable. It allows for the same benefit, especially when you start looking at the overhead ones that have the flashing lights on the side. So it may even make the PXO maybe less relevant than what's there today because you'll have these other options that we just don't have today.
Okay. I will ask the clerk's office to help us write a motion that this committee can vote on to support our staff in terms of discussion to do the modifications under the Highway Traffic Act. I think it's great to have it at a staff level, but I think as a committee we need to make a point. The MTO has held us on this for long enough. And this needs to be, the Minister of Transportation needs to be aware of this, and that's through mechanism of this committee. So I'll work offline to get that before the item gets approved or not. I have a couple of questions related to warrants. So we do numbers count, and that gives us a threshold in terms of is that adequate to install any item from the toolkit. I wonder if the discussion can be more of a strategic one in terms of, yes, if it's warranted, let's go, and no question there. But when it's not warranted, if it's a strategic initiative, there's as much value. So if we decide that a corridor should be more pedestrianized or a crossing should be determined to bring flows of pedestrian to a given crossing, you could count today, you wouldn't get the warrants, but that doesn't mean that as an overall good strategy, that shouldn't be part of the vision. So I'd like to hear from you. I recognize, and we've had discussion on the warrants, I think Councillor Kadri alluded to them, but I'm wondering as a strategic approach how we can kind of not downplay the warrants, but give a clear direction on what we can do related to areas that maybe have low pedestrian flows currently, but as an overall, either through development or either through just network connections can be implemented.
Mm-hmm. I guess one thing with these new pedestrian crossing devices, there are going to be some guidelines and warrants, but they're going to be a lot lower threshold than what we currently have for the traffic signal. The challenge, the warrants were developed to allow us to, it's based on risk assessment with regards to when you don't have a traffic signal and it ties into collisions and just the safety. You know, when you think of a vehicle or a pedestrian trying to cross a street and they don't have enough gaps, or it's taking a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes to cross, and as you get more and more people starting to do that, then more and more people become impatient, and then you get the likelihood of increased collisions. So the warrants were based on studies that were done and sort of data collection to say these were the numbers and the thresholds that were used to determine that when you get to this level, based on the total traffic on your main street, the total traffic on your side street, the total number of pedestrians that are crossing or delayed gets to a certain level, then that risk of a potential collision occurring increases great. So that's how those warrants have been developed. In the new pedestrian crossing device, they do look at pedestrian volumes, they look at vehicle volumes, but they also look at the context of where you are. Are you on a local street? Is there a school and things like that? So I think as time goes on, we're starting to use more of the context versus just looking at the numbers and saying, well, it doesn't meet the warrants, but how can we make it so that it can work? And at the end of the day, it may not be a traffic signal that might be, especially in the future where we've got this new device that could be used. It might be more of this new type of crossing device to be more appropriate for those local collector roads where we've got those issues today.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear the strategic element being looked at, because the system is flawed where we want to prioritize pedestrians and cyclists, but we do car counts and we do ped counts. But if it's not friendly for pedestrians, they're not going to use it. So, it's a catch-22 element where we really have to review the warrant piece. My other, and this one is maybe to both count the previous speakers' comments, was around limitations on the Highway Traffic Act. I think those are clear. There's no question they need to be changed yesterday, and hopefully we will bring the motion for us to direct the province on this. But the other element that I'd like to bring forward is the flexibility of staff looking under the Highway Traffic Act, and I'll specify the intersection or the crossing that was at Beausoleil and Chapel. It did bring a lot of attention. There was major issues. It's 3 schools in the area. We couldn't implement stop signs. We couldn't force cars to stop along Beausoleil. And with the flexibility and the really refined discussion with legal staff and your staff, Phil, we were able to look at what's the definition of an intersection and really bring in some flexibility to the interpretation, and that allowed us to put stop signs on Beausoleil, which is good. I don't think it's the outcome that's desired overall, because we need those amendments to the Highway Traffic Act, but I want to applaud the efforts there.
Okay, and just one comment. I just want to clarify. They're actually not going to change the Highway Traffic Act. They're going to change the regulations that are tied to the Highway Traffic Act. Because if they were to change the Highway Traffic Act, it would have to go and be in a bill that would have to go through Parliament. With the regulations, I think my understanding is that the minister can sign off on those regulation changes. So everything's being done, so the actual Highway Traffic Act will stay the same. But what they're doing is there's regulations that talk about a PXO, and we're just adding to those. So the same rules of the road will apply in the new with the new signs, similar to what the rules are right now with the existing PXO.
And that might bring us the discussion about the additional tools for it. But I'm wondering, does this prioritize pedestrians as we've talked about so often?
Well, what it does, it allows us now to use signs that are unsignalized, that are low cost, to provide priority to pedestrians. So it does provide that priority to pedestrians, which is what we've been looking for at roundabouts, at mid-block locations, even right turn channels.
Sure. Just a question for the Deputy Clerk. My recollection is that we have done a motion previously showing support for staff and moving forward with this initiative with the province. Can you confirm that, please?
Mr. Chair, I'm relieved to hear that, because that is my recollection as well. I am trying to find it and would ask the council respectfully to let us have time to find out what we've done, and we can prepare, certainly if council and committee has not already done this, which I believe they have, we can prepare a motion for the next Transportation Committee meeting.
Is that satisfactory, Councillor Flory? Okay. Councillor Clark.
Thank you. Well, if I read this right, if the warrants are met, we could install these things. There's nothing preventing us. PXOs.
For the PXOs now, they use the same warrant as the pedestrian signals.
So then the issue which Councillor Flory is raising is more a question of whether the rigorous application of the warrants should be modified.
And that's something that's being looked at through this project with MTO.
Which you're saying is next year?
No, the plan is the report's supposed to be done in the next month or so, and then it'll be sent to MTO, and the goal, and MTO staff, the goal is to have something in place, and the regulations changed by probably early fall.
So this will, in fact, not take another year to get around to?
No, that's not our understanding at this point.
Okay. The next question that I have is guidelines at right turn channels and roundabouts. Because I'll tell you, the Carter-Montreal Road and the Vanier Parkway, for example, if you're coming northbound and want to turn on the Montreal Road, pedestrians don't look first. They've got that little safety island that they're trying to reach, but it seems to me that there needs to be something, either a signal that will put on a flashing light or something of that effect, so that the pedestrian, when he's going to cross or she's going to cross, can hit the button and warn a motorist that somebody's going to cross, and it's not a through. The right turn spillways are intended to facilitate traffic, and they do, but my understanding is, are we allowed to put a flashing light up when a pedestrian is going to use that little piece of the intersection?
Not at this point, but with what's being proposed, we would be able to. And that would be the intent, to look at those right turn channels.
Yeah, I believe that, maybe I'm wrong, that these are the kinds of things we want to be talking to the province about.
Sorry, I missed that last point.
I think we want to talk to the province about these things.
Yeah, and that's what we've been doing, and like I said, if everything goes as to what we've seen to date with the work MTO's done, these things would be put in place and to be able to be used them hopefully later this year.
Yeah, I don't know the pedestrian conflicts at the roundabout that is down behind the bridge, Union roundabout. There is potential for pedestrian vehicle conflict there. And are we satisfied that we'll not have serious repercussions from that?
Well, again, this is part of the education as well, and what we're finding at a lot of the roundabouts is cars tend to stop. We did studies when the first ones came out, and some locations, 67% of the cars stopped when they didn't have to when they saw pedestrians. So I think at the roundabouts we'll have the signs that'll be there to say, you know what, pedestrians have priority. We may augment to the sign that's got the flashing light if we see there's a high pedestrian activity and there's issues with regards to cars not yielding. And we'll also have advance warning signs for the first little while to let people know that this sign means you need to stop for if pedestrians are there.
Well, I guess there's several roundabouts in the city that I've viewed, and pedestrian conflicts are not necessarily an issue at all of them, but I think in some of them in particular we need to look at.
Yeah, and if it's a high pedestrian volume, that's the kinds of things that we would do versus a location where there's not many pedestrians walking.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Wilkinson.
Just to follow up, first of all, from Councillor Fleury, who was talking, Councillor Fleury, I want you to know this, because you talked about PXOs. They were taken out for a reason. We had more danger at PXOs than we had with stop signs or anything else. We had a number of fatalities in them, and the decision was made at the regional level because of all the problems we had with them to take them all out. So I'd be very careful about bringing those ones back in. It's actually safer because of where drivers are looking. They're not looking up to that light. They're looking down on the road usually. That if you have the lines painted and you have that sign with that walking figure, I actually put one of those in Canada because we were using them in Quebec and it worked like a charm, and it wasn't in the Highway Traffic Act, but I put one in anyway, and everybody stopped for the pedestrians. It worked beautifully until the region, well, this new city of Ottawa came along and they said it's not legal and they took the darn thing out. But I think we have to look at what we can do, that it's legal and easy, particularly. Because if you're putting in light signs, you're 75 to 100,000, you only get a few a year. If you can do it with painting some lines and putting up a few signs, we might be able to handle 50 to 100 intersections a year. And that's a heck of a lot safer citywide than putting all the money into one or two locations. And I think if we get in the roundabouts, frankly, right now we've got a big sign saying, pedestrians, you've got to give way to the cars. And if we can get the lines painted and change that, and I've had questions from pedestrians about it, I'm sure others who have roundabouts have as well, that it will make it a lot easier because it's a short the nice thing about roundabouts, you're only doing one lane at a time if it's a single lane road, or 2 lanes if a double lane road, rather than the whole intersection. And when the kids are going to school, they're not very careful sometimes, and I'd rather have the cars stopping and letting them cross. So I think I'd like to wait till we can. We did put in a number of motions when we were doing the Safer Roads project and all of those asking the province to do this. We had our staff working with other municipalities first, and then the province last year, if you recall, took it over and promised something by this summer, and it looks like it's going to come. And I think we need to wait for that And then if we, or at least when they come in with the draft, I'd like to see it when it goes, it's on draft when you can still do final comments. And that's when we should tell the provinces there's some things we don't like. Because I think they're moving in the right direction. I want to see it happen. And I would like to see more places protected and not fewer.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak to the matter? I'm reminding Councillor Furley this isn't debate.
Not a debate. I'm just expressing that the PXO element was based on not me wanting to implement PXOs, but that when we were talking to MTO, they were using that to not advance the pedestrian toolkit, as, the city had decided not to go in the PXO direction. So that was my only comment. I'm not saying we should implement PXOs. I'm saying that that shouldn't be a moot point to engage in other discussions for pedestrian safety.
Fair enough. Seeing no other speakers, report received. Thank you. The next matter is number 3, Lansdowne Transportation Monitoring Program, which Councillor Chernyshenko asked to hold.
Carried.
In any event, we were going to have a presentation, a brief presentation from staff. Before we get there, though, I'd just like to make a few comments. The report is going to speak to an organization or a committee, the Lansdowne Traffic Advisory Committee, or LTAC as we called it. I've been part of this process for about a year now, and we would meet regularly in the mornings, and it was a combination of city staff and myself, Councillor Chernyshenko, and interested members of his community. Part of what you're going to hear today from staff is it's now time to move on from that committee to a new committee called the Lansdowne Transportation Monitoring Operations Committee. Doesn't run off the tongue like LTAC did, but it is the natural progression of where we need to go in preparing for the opening of Lansdowne Park. About LTAC, I'd like to say that, and I hope I'm speaking for everybody, it was a good partnership, it was good discussion, and some days it was good debate. And by that, what I mean is there were some days on some issues that parties agreed to disagree, but I think that everybody around that table can agree that good progress was made through that committee and through that consultation process. And it's my hope that that good partnership that we created with the community and with OSEG, who also participated, and we thank them for that in the process as well, will continue on with this new committee. As Lansdowne gets closer and closer to opening, we know there are going to be challenges in and around traffic, and staff is going to speak today to what we have achieved thus far through LTAC and how they see the new process going forward. We also have in the audience a couple of representatives from OSEG, Bernie Ash and Regis Trudell, who also are here to continue their partnership and see what we're doing here, but also be available for information and questions, I believe, if things come up specific to the OSEG proposed operations for the park. We also have a number of delegations from the public here, and these are people of the community who participated in LTAC and want to give their side of the story and speak to where they see us going forward and making further progress. So we've got a lot on our plate in terms of this report. So what I propose to do is we will have the staff presentation. And I would suggest that if committee agrees that we have the staff presentation followed by the delegations, and then at that point any questions for staff could be dealt with at that point in time. I also note that Councillor Chernyshenko has assured me he'll be using his 5 minutes and maybe more than that to give. Yes, he can. To give his perspective as the ward councillor on the process that we've undergone so far and where we're going from that point onwards. And he also has a motion proposed dealing with the speed limits on certain parts of Bank Street, which we'll deal with. You can introduce it during your 5 minutes, and then we'll open up to questions and debate on the motion. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to we've got 3 staff that are going to lead the presentation: John Smith, Phil Landry, who doesn't seem to be able to leave the table this morning, and Marco Manconi. So I'm going to turn it over. We have a slide presentation as well, and again, then we'll move to delegations from the community.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this really is marking sort of probably the last time that we're coming forward before a committee of council with respect to items that flowed from the very extensive planning process that was undergone for the Lansdowne revitalization. And I think, as this committee knows, and as we've definitely been engaged with the community, the transportation piece has had a lot of attention given to it, both in terms of the planning work that went into developing the overall strategy, the analysis that was undertaken, very detailed operations plans that were being developed, and the flow from that was now moving into a monitoring. So this is really marking a transition, if you like, from sort of the planning piece into more of the operations and the transitioning as we prepare to get Lansdowne ready for opening this summer, and as we start launching with that follow-up on the very extensive transportation work that was undertaken. So very briefly, in March of 2012, Transportation Committee approved 3 operations plans flowing from recommendations from a very comprehensive transportation study that was approved in 2010, and those 3 plans dealt with traffic and parking management, transit and shuttle services, and a very detailed transportation demand management plan. And all 3 of those plans, a key component of them was to undertake and develop a very comprehensive monitoring program for Lansdowne once it became up and running. Committee and council, when they approved of those 3 operations plans, also provided direction that we set up a group which has become known as the Lansdowne Transportation Advisory Committee. Councillor Chernachenko took the lead in setting that up. That group, as was indicated by the chair, comprised of a variety of people, representatives from the various community groups, city staff, the BIA, Citizens for Safe Cycling, the NCC, and the chair of the Transportation Committee, Councillor Eagley, and also representatives from OSAG. That group met on a number of occasions over an 18-month period from June 2012 to November of 2013. And one of the key objectives from the city's perspective, and as directed by council, was to develop that detailed monitoring plan. And that monitoring plan was in fact produced in consultation and through discussions with the group, being led by McCormick Rankin, the city's transportation consultant, and in fact is attached to the information report as before committee today. The other, next slide please. The other key thing that came out of the LTAC process was, again, the community identifying a number of things that they thought would be important to try to address and respond to before Lansdowne became operational. And a lot of that information, in fact, served very well to inform some of the details that went into the overall monitoring plan in terms of specific areas that the community felt there may be issues, and those were then flagged and incorporated into the overall monitoring plan. There were a number of actions that the community clearly wanted to see being undertaken to try to preempt what they felt could be impacts, notwithstanding what the various studies that were undertaken had identified, primarily that the transportation system would work and could work. However, notwithstanding, there were a number of things that were identified by the community, and I think Councillor Chernachenko is going to speak to this as well, that in fact we agreed with and in fact are being advanced. So improved cycling in the glebe was a fallout from the LTAC process. Looking at increased enforcement, which we agree should be undertaken once Lansdowne becomes operational. Various initiatives with respect to improving conditions along the Queen Elizabeth driveway, and really a need to involve the NCC. We're moving forward on those various items, including signage to direct people to be able to use the QED, introducing safer crossing at 5th and the Queen Elizabeth driveway, and also improve sidewalk connections from the NCC pathway system into Lansdowne. Bank Street signals, getting some priority for pedestrian movement, which some of that's been instituted and is being instituted as we speak. There's missing traffic controls that were identified by the community within the glebe. Those where we concluded that the warrants were met were to be introduced and implemented. And then the Canal Pedestrian Bridge, which was clearly included in the overall transportation master plan. EA work has been done on that, but that's all subject to budget pressures and budget priorities. There was a number of items that staff were not comfortable in moving forward with and felt that the whole purpose behind the monitoring was to allow Lansdowne to become operational, understand through a very comprehensive monitoring program where the challenges might be, and then start looking at whether or not there might be measures that would need to be implemented over time. And I think a lot of this is, I think, our experience in these types of initiatives, big projects, and I cite one example for the committee. When the Westboro Loblaws went in and was first approved, similar concerns were expressed in the Westboro community about the increased traffic that particular store would bring to the community, and there was preemptive measures that were taken to introduce a number of controls within the Westboro neighborhood to manage traffic. Within 6 months, those controls were all removed. So again, as per experience, the study said there would be no issue. There was concern. Action was taken. Within 6 months, all of those things were taken out. So in this instance, given the nature of some of the measures that were being suggested, and they do have cost implications and overall system implications, the staff view was that we should allow Lansdowne to become operational, monitor aggressively, determine where the challenges are, and then move forward with implementation where there's a need to address some of the mitigation issues. So, and then there were also various items that the LTAC identified which sort of flowed into things that OSAG is going to be looking after doing, so we're continuing to work with OSAG in advancing some of these things. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I think my role, sort of having led the planning process for the city on this project, is really now transitioning into, as I mentioned, the operations side. Phil Landry is going to be chairing up the Lansdowne Transportation Monitoring Operations Committee. It's very much in his shop, and Marco Manconi is very much involved in the transition piece. I'm going to turn it over to Phil to give an overview in terms of the overall Lansdowne Transportation Monitoring Operations Committee.
Thanks, John. So as John mentioned, the Lansdowne Transportation Monitoring Operations Committee flowed out of the monitoring plan that was prepared last November. And just a comment that this is the most comprehensive ongoing monitoring program that the city's ever undertaken. We've undertaken specific studies, and this was started back in 2009 in the preparation for the planning documents. We did a refresh in 2012, and we'll be starting this month to collect more traffic and parking data in the area. So we have a good baseline as Lansdowne starts to open up for businesses and residents, as well as for the events. And also, it's also continuing the collaboration between the city, OSAG, and the community on this transportation project. From our perspective, this is a very important project, and we also want to ensure that we work with the community to mitigate any of the impacts that may occur. But we also want to make sure that we have the information, the data, and the feedback to ensure that any changes that we do make sense, and there's a community consensus on. So the membership, as John mentioned, I'm going to be the chair of this operations committee. The ward councillor, Councillor Turnashenko, will be on this committee. Councillor Eagle-Eye is chair of Transportation Committee. We'll also have the Glebe Community Association, the Glebe BIA, Old Ottawa South Community Association. And again, these are the groups that are directly impacted with Lansdowne. We have OSAG, their TDM coordinator, who's been hired, is part of this committee. We also have internal staff, Public Works, Planning Growth Management, OC Transpo, Parks and Recreation, and Corporate Communications that are on this committee. And this is the core committee that's going to deal with the day-to-day as well as the special events. But as we get to the large-scale events, and if you recall, back when we did this presentation a few years ago, we had this chart that talked to as events increase from the day-to-day to the 67s to football to the one or two of large-scale Grey Cup or large concert events, more and more people get engaged. So as we get into looking at the football that's going to be starting up this summer, we'll have STO, the shuttle provider, the NCC, MTO, Ottawa Police, fire paramedics. They'll be all part of the team to develop a plan along with the community to try to mitigate the impacts. Always keep in mind that we have this monitoring plan, and we also have the traffic and management plans that have been developed as we prepared for this event. So the committee, their main goals, and again, this we're going to be developing in terms of reference that will be reviewed at the first meeting with the committee, which is planned for later this month, is to review and provide feedback on the monitoring program itself, the mitigation measures that may be contemplated based on what we see, the data collection activities to make sure that we're collecting the right data at the right time, looking at traffic management plans for large events, also feedback from members of the public, what's going on day to day and even during events to get their input. It's also providing comments on the annual reports that OSEG and the city will be preparing. One of the conditions and things that we'll be doing is on an annual basis we'll be providing a report back to Transportation Committee on the initiatives and the progress that's been had over that past year. So at this time, I will pass it to Marco Manconi, who's the head of the transition team.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few months ago, it was becoming evident that we needed a full-time team that was focused on the actual transition from plans and construction to actually making the site come alive in July of 2014 through the summer of fall. And with the city and its partner OSEG, we came up with a structure that essentially has a city team and an OSEG team that are working very closely as a team to make sure that we reach these milestones. And at this point, there are 4 main areas that we're focusing on. They are construction, operations, events management, and transportation. A lot of our focus right now is really geared towards the transportation piece. With the city's lead for this transportation team is Byron Hemlow. He's sitting in the room here. And as the chair mentioned, from OSEG here today is Bernie Ash, Regis Trudel, and Hassan Madoun, who is the TDM coordinator. And all of these are members of this transition team on the OSEG side. And the transition team transportation leads, being Byron from the city and Hassan from OSEG, will be the members on this operations committee during this transition period. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think that concludes our presentation. If there's any questions that committee members might have before hearing from the delegations, we'll be more than happy to answer.
Well, actually, I think we'd agreed that we do the delegations before we go to questions to staff. I just want one clarification, though. When you were running through the membership, it was my understanding that there would be a representative from Old Ottawa East on the committee as well. Is that not accurate, or do you need direction from the committee in that regard?
Yeah, Old Ottawa East was considered, and the thought was as the things develop, and especially if the pedestrian bridge, when it becomes a direct impact, they could be on that committee, but there's no issues with them being on the committee at the start of the project. So
if I give you direction, that's fine?
Yep.
They're at it?
Yep, they're at it.
Perfect. Welcome, Old Ottawa East. So the first delegation is Mr. Brian Mitchell from the Glebe Community Association. Good morning, Brian. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since June 2012, the Glebe Community Association has been an active participant within the LTAC, and we are very grateful for its creation by Councillors Ternashenko and Transportation Committee. Grateful because it finally represented a channel through which residents most impacted by the traffic generated by Lansdowne could express their concerns and offer their invaluable local intelligence regarding transportation patterns. Consultations that were unbelievably absent when the city conducted and approved its transportation impact study of the Lansdowne project in 2010. And their concerns mostly relate to the day-to-day activities of Lansdowne. And why wouldn't they? Anyone living on a narrow residential road that suddenly has a 10-screen Cineplex placed near their street, together with destination grocery and sporting goods stores, is going to be concerned about the traffic impact in their community. And this development is much larger than a single superstore in Westboro. As you can see by Chapter 4 in Appendix E to the monitoring plan, the community took this opportunity to be heard via LTAC very seriously. A year ago, the Community Association conducted public meetings, online and door-to-door surveys, and other consultations that gave voice to nearly 1,000 Glebe residents, particularly those living closest to Lansdowne. These residents, who initially may have said, "Not in my backyard," are now saying, "Help us make it work in my backyard." How can we ensure that Lansdowne works in a way that gets patrons, shoppers, and moviegoers in and out of the venue as efficiently as possible, preferably via transit and active transportation, and with the least disruption on nearby residential streets? Through its consultations, the community, working closely with the city staff to ensure feasibility, identified measures that would achieve this objective and highlighted several which should be implemented before Lansdowne opens, and others that should be considered based on traffic monitoring after opening. Regretfully, only a few of the community's recommendations have been accepted. Most recommendations have been placed in a wait-and-see category for possible implementation after 1 to 2 years of monitoring traffic patterns arising from Lansdowne. This monitor-only and wait-and-see position has become another source of frustration for those living closest to Lansdowne, particularly because the measures requested are simple, most have no budgetary impact, and all have been put forward on the basis of broad consultation and community support. My colleagues from the neighboring communities will address some of the recommendations we share in common on how to encourage more active transportation to Lansdowne and also regarding pedestrian safety. I would like to highlight just 2 recommendations that residents have requested based on the measures that the city has adopted in other high traffic volume and parking demand locations. The first is that residents on the streets closest to Lansdowne understandably want to ensure their streets do not become the parking lot for Lansdowne. Parking on these streets is already approaching full occupancy, as documented in the monitoring plan. No monitoring is required to know that some visitors to Lansdowne will look to local streets to park to avoid the inconvenience or cost of entering the paid Lansdowne garage. Just a few such vehicles will push these streets to 100% utilization. Action, not monitoring, is needed here. And the action requested is so simple. Grant the residents living within 3 blocks of Lansdowne the same privilege that all other residents have across the city, which is to set the parking restrictions on their street based on the wishes of the residents living there. And provide to those residents a guest permit parking system which the city has specifically designed for use near sporting venues and which it already uses near the baseball stadium. Secondly, early in the LTAC process, we were warned not to request too many changes to local streets and traffic flow, which may prove unwarranted. And the community listened to this advice and returned with just one simple traffic flow request on which it could demonstrate broad community support on the directly impacted streets. That request is to close access to Homewood from Bank Street. This narrow street, one of the narrowest in the city and the most impacted by all of the Lansdowne project, is already a cut-through route for traffic avoiding congestion on Bank Street. It will become the go-to street for Lansdowne visitors looking for on-street parking instead of using the garage or for picking up their teenagers from the nearby Cineplex. No monitoring is needed to confirm the experience of long-time residents who know full well the behavior of vehicles from events at Lansdowne in the past, and who will now be living on a street that will see high levels of activity at Lansdowne every day due to the retail operations and cinema. The community wants Lansdowne to work.
Mr. Mitchell, your 5 minutes is up. Can you wrap it up?
Sentence.
Perfect.
The community wants its knowledge of local streets and traffic patterns reflected in the planning around the project. Thus far, with the exception of just a couple of measures, this has not been the case. This is a shame and a real opportunity lost for those of us trying to make Lansdowne a success. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions for the delegation? Councillor Deans.
I'm not sure what the question is, but thank you for being here. And I understand, been reading some about what happened at in Winnipeg when they opened the new Investors Group Stadium out there, and the abutting community. It sounds like the same thing. So what I heard you say is that the city is saying wait and see, we'll monitor. How much of the glebe are you asking for this parking restriction and guest parking pass? Is it the whole glebe or just a couple of streets, or what?
So the specific request is within a 2 to 3 block radius on the basis of following the city's own petition process. So a 2 to 3 block radius of Lansdowne. So we're talking about 5th and South, and as far over as Ralph and East.
So maybe to the city staff then, if I could, why wouldn't we, at least on a temporary basis, implement that and see how it worked out? Like why does it have to be just monitor from the beginning? I mean, there is a history here. It's not as if there wasn't a stadium before and we aren't aware of some of the issues that were created.
Mr. Chairman, this is something that was looked at, and staff were prepared to introduce additional restrictions during the daytime for day-to-day, but I think the important thing that committee has to remember is that the overall transportation strategy that council approved for Lansdowne was very much premised on a recognition of available parking supply within the glebe that would, at least for the start, potentially support some of the activity or primarily the events at Lansdowne, with a view to implementing very aggressive TDM measures, instituting the whole notion of the shuttle bus and the off-site parking, and eventually work towards getting people to not select to park within the glebe. So all of the pro formas that were developed around the shuttle operations was all premised on a parking supply that was confirmed through various surveys as being available. If we start reducing that parking supply by introducing parking restrictions that extend into the periods when there would be events at Lansdowne, it in fact is undermining the approvals that council has already given as it relates to the Lansdowne transportation strategy for events in particular.
When the Rough Riders used to be here, did we have any parking restrictions on those streets in the glebe?
The parking restrictions, I'll look to Mr. Landry, but I would suspect that they have been the same as they are today when the Rough Riders were here.
That's correct.
Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you.
If someone wishes to speak to committee as part of a delegation, I'd ask you to sign up at the desk, please, but we can entertain comments from the crowd. I see that legal was catching me out of the corner of my eye and wants to speak to the issue, I think, that you raised, Councillor Deans.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to supplement what Mr. Smith just mentioned, and that was that Council had approved the transportation plan for Lansdowne back on June 28th of 2010. Then subsequently, as we know, on October the 10th of 2012, Council approved the final Lansdowne Partnership Plan legal agreements, together with authorizing the project to proceed to construction. Now, as part of that, there were numerous legal agreements that were signed involving the city and the Ottawa Sports and Entertainment Group, which took a number of the transportation demand management measures and actually embedded those into the various legal agreements so as to be enforceable. And so there are provisions in the retail lease, there are provisions in the site plan agreement that pick up and embed those obligations. So to, as I say, conclude, and I've been consulted previously on a couple of measures that have been proposed. And so what staff has done is to go back, to look at the plan that was approved by Council, to look at the reports from McCormick, Rankin, Cook. Those measures that did not indirectly or directly affect the plan that had been approved by Council and embedded into the legal agreements have been considered, and I know of at least one that is being supported by staff. I'm not sure if it's concluded yet, but it's been supported by staff. And so all of which is to say that there are procedural impediments to a number of the things that the community has been seeking, in that they are contrary to what council previously approved. There are also legal impediments as well, because they would change or purport to change various provisions that are already in the legal agreements between the city and the Ottawa Sports and Entertainment Group. So that's the legal impediment.
Thank you. I'm going to allow Councillor Deans a follow-up to that, but I'm going to remind committee members that we did agree that we would save questions for staff until after the delegations.
Yeah, but sometimes questions arise out of the delegations. So I just want to be clear about this. So there's legal agreements in place that would prevent us from moving ahead with taking on-street parking off the street. Is that right?
That's correct, to the extent that those provisions are contrary to or either directly or indirectly affect the plan which Council had approved back in June of 2010 based on the 3 reports from McCormick, Rankin, Cook that Council had considered and specifically approved at that time.
So I'm just wondering, why bother monitoring? Because if it's embedded in the legal agreement that we can't change, then what's the point of the monitoring?
Mr. Chairman, the point of the monitoring is to understand. One of the key elements of the monitoring program is really focused on getting people to make alternative choices to get to and from Lansdowne, both for day-to-day and for special events. One of the key elements of the whole transportation strategy is an incredibly aggressive transportation demand management program. There was an obligation placed on OSAG to hire a TDM coordinator, which they've done, and various physical measures that are being introduced into the whole Lansdowne project to support TDM, but it's the whole concept of the various promotions and so on that needs to occur. The direction behind the TDM is to get people to use alternative travel modes, and part of determining how successful we are on that is to what extent are people still continuing to look to park within the glebe, or in fact are they moving away from parking in the glebe. And the expectation and the hope would be that over the course of time that people would make alternative selections, would not go to the glebe as the first choice and try to find a place to park. So the impacts in terms of the on-street parking may diminish over time and may not be a significant issue for the community beyond what might normally be experienced as an interurban community. So that's part of the purpose of the monitoring. If there are situations where there are real problems that are arising, we can take a look to see whether or not there are initiatives that might be able to pursue on more of a case-by-case, localized-by-localized basis, as opposed to a fell swoop approach to put in place restrictions where in fact the restrictions may not be required, or where we're very successful in the TDM strategy that people aren't actually using those streets. So that's the purpose behind it. It's a whole comprehensive approach in terms of dealing with how is the transportation system functioning, how effective are the TDM measures, what do we need to do to try to advance greater take-up on using alternative travel modes through the TDM program that's going to be implemented.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilkinson.
I want to go back to the delegation, Mr. Chair. I think we're getting away from that. I was thinking, well, you said in your presentation that would be 1 or 2 years of monitoring before any changes would happen. I think that's what I heard you say.
Yeah, those words, in fact, come straight out of the monitoring plan report that was circulated to the
And have
members.
you, in your discussions when you're in the committee, looked at it that may be the general way to go, but if something comes up that's obviously a big problem almost right away, was it in your understanding that in that agreement they could make interim changes if necessary, not wait that long? And I'll ask staff later, but that's not...
We certainly hope that to be the case, and certainly the GCA, the Glebe Community Association, will be an active participant, as you saw, in the new committee. The concern is that the monitoring plan does not include any sense of triggers or levels at which action needs to take place. So there's a lot of monitoring instruments in the program and in the plan, but nothing to say at what point does action get taken. And that concerns the community because it may well then need to take 1 to 2 years before action's taken.
Now, you've also referred to some of the existing things that people can do about parking and things on their streets by petitions, because I've had some in my area. The change general of that is that those restrictions then become no parking. Do you think that would be something that the people in the glebe in some streets would want, or is that just going to hinder them? Because I know there's not a lot of places on properties to park there.
So in the immediate vicinity of Lansdowne, it's typically 3-hour parking, and the residents are requesting that be reduced to 1 hour and the time extended to 10 or 11 p.m. The obvious reason being the movie theater and the other retail activities taking place at Lansdowne, so that those streets aren't used as a way to avoid the parking garage or to avoid having to pay to park. That's the primary ask. The residents, in many cases, actually use on-street parking because they do not have a driveway. So no one is asking for no parking. No, that would be very difficult for the community.
Okay. So I'll have my other questions be for staff later. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the delegation?
Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Mitchell. And our next presenter is Winnie Pertowski from Old Ottawa South Community Association. Good morning, Winnie.
Good morning. I'm from Old Ottawa South. I'm with the board, the Ottawa South Community Association. Old Ottawa South, north to south, is between 2 bridges, between the Bank Street Bridge and the Billing Street Bridge. It runs to Bronson and then to the west to Avenue Road, where then it connects with Old Ottawa East. I'm not here just as an interested citizen, although I am interested. I'm here with the board, and the board itself has conducted a number of surveys. So in the last year and a half, we have actually consulted with about 1,000 members in our community. So the voice that you hear today is not necessarily just my voice. It's actually the voice of quite a large and significant number of people in our community, which totals approximately 6,500 people. We call our newsletter Between the Bridges. Both bridges were built in the early 1900s. Okay? We're now in 2014. We have the same heritage bridges that connects us north to south. And our main corridor is Bank. So our concerns are very similar to that of the glebe, because we're concerned about pedestrian safety. And the corners, the intersections that I'm particularly interested in, because I've tried to narrow down the recommendations. And definitely our community's recommendations are speaking to the anticipated increase in traffic. We already are experiencing a lot of traffic. We have some intersections that are really difficult intersections. These are Sunnyside and Bank and Aylmer, just as you come over the bridge and cross the canal. On Sunnyside and Bank, you have at one corner, other than some of the commercial businesses like Shoppers Drug Mart, restaurants, pet parlors, beauty salons, you have a school with 850 kids, of which only 125 are bused. So that tells you something about the traffic of school children crossing our streets up to 4 times a day. We have a community center that has traffic of 2,000 people weekly. We have a daycare that is going to open in the spring, so that's all on the same corner, okay? Within the same one block of Sunnyside and Bank. And within another block going north, you've got a library, and then you have Southminster Church, where you have also preschool programs. So we have a lot of pedestrian traffic that travels through the neighborhood. It's not just Sunnyside and Bank, it's definitely Riverdale, and it goes from east to west. And it is a pedestrian neighborhood. We live very close to downtown, very close to services, very close to the canal, and yes, we have experiences with Lansdowne Park. I do want to say something, though. I'm very happy to be here today because I was very happy to hear your earlier conversations. I was really happy to hear some of you speak to your concerns about pedestrian safety. It really warmed my heart because it's certainly something that at times I have felt as if I were talking to a blank wall. What I mean by that is that there are plans. There is a monitoring plan. We have strategies, but there's a human element here. You need to think about what's been going on in the last year and a half, especially when I hear my colleague from the Glebe. If you ever walked up and down Homewood, my heart goes out to the residents there. Why they didn't get a tax break this last year, I'll never understand, because that's what I would have been lobbying for. Because it is unacceptable that we would treat our neighbors that way, that they would have extended hours of work and noise and pollution and dust, and that we would give them no consideration to what is to benefit not their street alone, but the neighborhood and the region. Anyway, that's just a comment of mine. But what I heard this morning was I was really happy to hear the discussion around the changes in regulations to the Highway Transportation Act. This is very important because we were looking for some safety measures. We did meet with the mayor on Monday. We are going to be working as a result of that meeting with Phil Landry a little more intensely to try and secure some better safety measures to an intersection that every time we bring up, people shake their head, whether it's the city, whether it's elected officials, whatever, who say, that's a problem corner, we can't do anything with it, we've tried 10 years ago, we still can't.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Okay, I'm just saying, that problem existed before Lansdowne, it's going to get worse, so something has to happen. The other thing that I heard that is of interest to me is the way the budget is decided. Okay, so there's an investment of $400 million into Lansdowne. What is the financial investment that was made to this community with respect to traffic to prepare them for this $400 million plus investment? I suspect we're being taken care of under the status quo, the annual budget. It's an imbalance, and we are the ones who are shouldering that imbalance. So I'll rest my case. Thank you. It's been really very, very interesting coming here today, and I'm happy that you're trying so hard to make pedestrians first, pedestrians, cyclists, motorists. I think that that's very important, and I think Ottawa can become, if Nova Scotia can be a province-friendly pedestrian.
Okay, again, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Ottawa could do it. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Any questions for the delegation? Councillor Wilkinson.
Just at the school, I know that area well because I grew up in Ottawa East and then lived in the Glebe, so I know it pretty well. Do you have school crossing guards there now on Bank Street for the children?
Yes, we do.
So you have ways of stopping the traffic for the pedestrians crossing?
At certain hours during the day, we do.
Okay.
It's because there's that many students going to school. They live in the neighborhood. So yes, we have
I understand that
crossing guards at particular times of the day.
It's a very busy street, so
yeah.
That's important. The other question you raised about budgets and things like that, I'm going to ask staff about this more, but my understanding is that there have been some additional budget items for transportation, things, even the whole study that they've been doing and the monitoring and all of that is all outside of these already, but I'll see what I can find out.
I would like to know what kind of an investment went into.
Yeah.
Yes, that aspect.
And is going into, because it's not stopped yet. I think we have to know this is a situation is still continuing, obviously.
As long as we see active results, right? In the sense of...
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further questions, I'd ask Mr. John Dance to come forward. It's my understanding Mr. Dance is the last delegation. If there's anybody else in the audience that wishes to speak to committee on this matter, if they could just sign up at the corner underneath the television by the door. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Dance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And indeed, thank you, Councillor Chairman Schenko, for re-including us onto the continuation of the Transportation Advisory Operations Committee. Appreciate that. So, in terms of Old Ottawa East, we're, well, first off, darn. Okay, we're all right. Thank you very much. So LTAC, we know what LTAC was for. It was to identify ways to mitigate traffic and parking challenges, find ways to get more visitors by modes other than car. And thanks to the hard work of Ottawa South Community Association and GCA, numerous improvements are recommended, although as pointed out, relatively few were accepted. The outstanding traffic problems, particularly the day-to-day, remain, and they're just going to be aggravated by the events in day-to-day traffic. Darn. I'm having a little difficulty here. Is this one?
Just hit
which one? That's it. Okay, thank you very much. So, yes, glad we're going to be a continuing member. I think it really is important that the new committee, the Operations Committee, act not at the end of a year, but act as it goes. And indeed, I was encouraged to see on the staff's presentation that you'll be acting on feedback that you receive along the way. We very much, the Ottawa East, the Old Ottawa East Community Association, very much supports the Glebe and Ottawa South recommendations. Of particular note, we endorse the acceleration of the 5th Clegg Canal footbridge and cycling lanes on the 2 Bank Street bridges. Proposed canal footbridge. Now, I know today is not a great day to be trying to talk about another footbridge in the city given yesterday. But nevertheless, this is really important. It's important for the success of Lansdowne. It's important for connectivity, active transportation connectivity in the city. The EA for this began back in 2010. But the construction isn't until 2020 to 2025, if money's available. It's the same sort of timeline that Corktown was on. It took forever to get built, and I bet you there's not a councillor around here who doesn't think that was one of the best investments the city's ever made. You know, just as the other footbridges are, you know, they're so important, this is too. It's going to serve many purposes, not just providing, finally, safe access for the people in the south and east, pedestrians and cyclists. Cost is an issue, of course, but, you know, we have no trouble spending $35 million on a parking garage, moving the horticulture building, restoring it, using development charges for urban park. Good thing, admittedly, but why can't we use DCs for this footbridge as well? So we really strongly recommend that you accelerate construction of that, not wait another 6 or 10 years to get it done. If you want Lansdowne to work, you need that. So in terms of cycling lanes on Bank Street bridges, both those bridges, if any of you have ridden on them, I know Councillor Schenko rides on them regularly, they've been dangerous and miserable for years. They're just going to become worse. And while, you know, there's going to be a motion to have, well, there'll be sharrows and reduced speed, that's not enough. It's just horribly unsafe. Somebody's going to be killed on these bridges. But even from the standpoint of the success of Lansdowne, people are not going to be able to get there as easily on bike and walking. So, you know, sort of undercutting the likelihood of success of the park. We know that parking on-site, Lansdowne site, is about half of what it was before, yet there's many more things going on the site. Nothing, despite what Mr. Schmidt had to say, encouraging other ways of getting there, what really is being done? Aside from the yet-to-be-done Glebe neighborhood cycling route, nothing is being done to allow people to get to the Glebe actively. Okay? And event planning for shuttle buses, all very nice, but no investments are being made to make it easier, safer for pedestrians and cyclists to get there. You know, so you've got Lansdowne looking like any other Ottawa mall with but without free parking, without easy access, and I think you're setting yourself up for failure unless you take some action soon. And I know there are budgetary issues. Your window of opportunity is closing fast. Why wouldn't there be a sparkling, complete, safe cycling and pedestrian network that would get cyclists and pedestrians to Lansdowne? Why wouldn't you have that to make it really work? It would work for the host communities, it would work for the new Lansdowne. Imagine having a map before you saying, look, bike there, but you can't do that because there aren't the routes in place. There are no plans for doing it aside from the Glebe neighborhood cycling route. You have an opportunity in the Transportation Committee for a little vision to make this better. I really hope you take it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dance. Are there any questions for delegations? Councillor Clark.
Thank you. I see that you say, why can't LDCs be used for the bridge? Well, hopefully in June, when we have the LDC report, that it will become eligible. Personally, that bridge is important, in my view, as a little less important than the one at Donald Street, but that's a particular secular bias. But I think that all of the arguments you've been making about whether it's unsafe to come over that Bank Street Bridge hill down through Elmer and Sunnyside is not putting some people at risk, whether it's on bicycles, whether they're on their feet, or whether there's a car coming legitimately out of an intersection. When you come over that hill, if you don't travel at something resembling a safe speed, there could be problems. And I just laud you people for all the work you've done trying to support my neighbor here.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions for the delegation? Thank you very much, Mr. Dance.
Thank you.
We'll now move to questions to staff, and I'd like to start off and hopefully nip something in the bud at the very beginning, Mr. Landry. We heard from Mr. Mitchell his concern that nothing will happen as a result of the new committee for a year or two. It was certainly my understanding that the committee would be ramping up meetings prior to the major openings, would be holding post-mortem meetings following the first football game, the first big concert, all those sorts of things, and that we would evaluate what happened at those openings and those events, and if necessary, we would come back to this committee or to council to say, as a result of what we've seen, this needs to be done. Am I wrong on that?
No, Mr. Chair, you're correct.
Okay,
that's the way. So we're going to start, like I said, our first meeting is going to be in a few weeks, and we'll be ramping up, presenting and then talking about the plans, and then as things get going, we'll have debriefs after the first football game. As more the day-to-day operations start going, we'll be collecting data, we'll be talking, getting feedback from residents, and if need be, we need to do some things, for example, some turn restrictions or other things if we see there's an actual problem. But again, we want to collect the data to make sure that there's a problem, because some measures can be very restrictive, which, when people think, well, it's not it's something that we all want, but then when you actually implement it, they sometimes have second thoughts. We want to make sure that what we do put in has some basis for that issue, and then if we need to, like you mentioned, we'll come back to council and committee to get further direction if required.
Thank you. My next question, and I'm not sure this is directed to staff or directed to one of the representatives from OSEG, but a topic that was brought up during part of the presentations was what happened in Winnipeg. And I'm wondering if someone can speak to a review of the Winnipeg situation, if you will, what was learned from that, and what the city and or OSEG may be doing different from what they did in Winnipeg. Can we get a mic, or if you can come up?
Mr. Chairman, OSEG has actually looked into the experience with Winnipeg staff as well, but I am not overly familiar with it, so Mr. Reeds is probably the best person, and Mr. Ash to provide comments on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we did hear about Winnipeg, and we're anxious to find out. So I personally, myself and our operations manager went out there last fall. and experienced it for ourselves by attending a weekend game. Before that, though, we sat down, we talked to the stadium operators and with the Winnipeg Transit people. And as it turned out, at the end of the day, it was actually a good story for them in that from a learning experience, but from the point of view that their consultants had recommended certain levels of transit service, shuttle bus service, bike parking, corral service and whatnot. And they went by the experience of their old site and said, you know, that's a little too much. We don't think, you know, that many people will come by transit, etc. So they did not plan as much as was recommended. For example, they were used to 5,000 or 6,000 people coming by shuttle buses that they had at the old stadium. Their average was over 10,000. That's why they had to keep sending the buses back. That's why people weren't getting there till halftime. And the headlines, you know, people not arriving until halftime. They were used to 500 or 600 people coming by bicycle. 1,500 was their average. So they had to really increase their bicycle corrals and the lineups, you know, reduced accordingly. So it was a good story from that point of view. They got people out of their cars, onto the buses, onto their bikes. The negative part was they didn't prepare for it because they didn't believe the projections. We've been involved in the transportation studies from day one, and we've learned from Winnipeg to not only embrace, you know, the recommendations, but to take that as our minimum, especially in the first year. We want to overserve, overplan, so that until we see the way people are coming, and in order to make it a good experience to take the shuttle buses, the OC, and their bicycles, we want that to be a positive experience, so they continue to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Manconi, did you want to? Yes. The discussions aren't over with Winnipeg as well. We've reached out to the actual to the city bureaucracy in Winnipeg, and we're expecting some calls back to understand how they dealt with the entire process for their first game and how they continually communicate, market, and speak to the residents at large. So it's going to be a continuing progress, I think, right till day one.
And a follow-up question to either the OSEG reps. It might seem like an obvious question, but what happens to your investment if people can't get in and out of Lansdowne efficiently and get there for the beginning of the game or the beginning of the concert?
It's a disaster. Clearly, we need to have a positive experience for anyone that visits Lansdowne, particularly on events, because it's a fan experience starts from the minute they leave their house until the minute they return home. So making transit and transportation, the experience of getting to and from the venue is a critical part of our success. So it'll be very important that we execute extremely well right from the beginning and make adjustments as we go.
Okay. Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah, I just follow up with some of the ones I asked as we were going along, and maybe a bit more that you've raised already. There was a request about a map for the cycling and what the Winnipeg experience is. Obviously, you may get more cycling. Even though our cycling system is not complete, it's one of the things that we're going to be putting out at the beginning is to say, if you are cycling, this is the way to go, this is where the bike racks are, or the bike storage areas, and having enough. Is that going to be part of the package for let's say the first game? Because the first game is going to be I'll call a trial and error game that people are going to try things out.
Cycling is an important part of the alternative means of transportation. We recognize it as a priority. We are going to be looking at and borrowing many of the good ideas, the encouragements and the inducements that are provided in Winnipeg. There are other examples and other venues where they encourage the use of cycling and involve local cycling clubs in doing that. So we'll be looking at all those options, and We have the areas at Lansdowne that we can use for bicycle corrals, so we've identified as a priority for our TDM coordinator to
I want something a little more
implement.
specific. We're opening this summer. It's not very long away. I want to know, are you going to do a map that shows people how to get to Lansdowne by bike ahead of the first game in July? And secondly, have that shown taking them to those places where they can park?
Absolutely. Our plans include a lot of marketing and a lot of communication to all the residents of the city. We have the good fortune of having all of the email addresses and phone numbers of everybody who's going to be attending the first game. Our season ticket holders, obviously, already, and remaining ticket buyers. So we have a lot of opportunities to communicate with them prior to the event.
Now, and I know that in the games, they're going to have the OC Transpro cost of going on the bus is included in their ticket. That's still happening, I take it.
It is.
And is that going to happen for concerts and other activities as well, or is it only for the football games?
It's required for any events over 15,000 people.
So not for the hockey, but for the other things?
Okay. It's included as a recommendation for hockey. We can implement that, yes.
If you needed to. And so that the information people will have on park and rides to get to it, et cetera, and you're going to do I don't know, maybe there'll be a 500 series rather than a 400 series for the hockey, but it actually is a very good way of going. That's how I go to the hockey games. Even though I live close there, I take the bus.
Yes.
Okay, the other one...
I might mention, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor that that's one thing Winnipeg did very well, and that's why they got the response they did on the shuttle buses and the bikes, was get the message out so people knew where to go and what to do.
They weren't thinking because you give somebody something free, they're going to use it. There was two questions other than the Clear Cat's answer. One was on budget and when we do if we do with the implementation find there's some things we want to do, is there a budget within the overall Lansdowne development budget that can be used for some of these things? Or are we going to have operating pressures continuously on trying to implement anything that maybe we find should happen?
Mr. Chairman, in terms of mitigation measures that might be identified as things that should be considered for implementation resulting from the monitoring, there are certain things that could be done that would fall within existing operating budgets, so fairly straightforward signage changes, pavement markings, turn restrictions, but if there are things that are identified for more significant interventions, no, there is no budget to implement those, and those things would then have to come back forward to actually have budget dollars approved for.
That's a little bit of a concern because we only have so much money for things, and it means other parts of the city don't get things. I think there should be some thought about how we can integrate it into transportation. I suppose it's all these legal agreements, which is my other question. If some of the mitigation things would end up having an impact on the existing 200-odd legal agreements that I understand were signed, what's the process for actually doing them?
Chair, there are several options as to how that might be addressed, and I might say part of that process would be that we at the city would be consulting with our partner, OSEG, with regard to those measures. As you've heard from those representatives, they have a vested interest in the whole transportation plan being successful, as does the city in that regard. So what we would do was, first of all, meet with them. We'd look at what is being proposed. We would go back to what Council had approved in June of 2010 when it received the reports from McCormick, Rank and Cook. And obviously, if there were things that both sides felt strongly about that needed to be changed, one option would be to come back to committee and council in that regard to seek that change, and it would have to be on the basis that OSEG would be agreeable and was supportive of those measures, so that if provisions need to be changed in the agreements, they could be done by mutual consent. The other option, as we go forward, there may be other measures which are perhaps important but less significant, both as far as cost as well as the legal agreement, that perhaps can be done without having to go back to committee and council. Again, we at the city would sit down with OSEG. In-house legal at the city would be dialoguing with the legal counsel for OSEG to see how that might be accomplished.
If the city strongly felt something should happen and OSEG disagreed, does that mean it can't happen?
If you're talking about an amendment to the plan that's been previously approved by council, and to the extent that that has been incorporated into any of the relevant legal agreements, the answer to that would be yes, there would be an impediment in that regard. Again, one of the options in that case would be to look at what the cost would be, and that would have to be part of the discussion.
So there'd have to be a lot of negotiations then. Okay. Well, I think the other questions I had were already answered when you asked your question, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Chernyshenko is next on the list, and I believe he's going to take this opportunity to introduce his motion related to speed. The other issue that he's going to raise, and I put it to the committee as to how we proceed with this, I believe he's also going to request that in addition to the Glebe Community Association having a representative on the new committee, that there be a specific representative from Homewood. I know it's in the report, but the question is this, Councillor Clark, is the will around the table to simply deal with this by way of direction as we did with Old Ottawa East, or do you wish him, he's contemplating bringing a motion, as I understand it? Staff's nodding its head, that's...
Yeah, no, that's okay. Fine.
All right, then you'll take that as direction? Okay, Councillor Chernyshenko, if you want to introduce, before your remarks, your other motion.
Okay, if you want to do it in that order, I'll do the motion first. Quite simply, you should have it before you. It is a motion to reduce the speed limit of Bank Street between Riverdale Avenue and Chamberlain Street to 40 kilometers an hour. It's essentially acknowledging, well, two things. One is that is generally the traveling speed on any reasonably congested day. It's not the traveling speed when traffic is light. It's certainly the desirable speed when traffic is light, because when we see speeding occurring is in the quieter parts of the day. So it's essentially an indicator that in this section of central part of the city, a 40-kilometer zone is what we want to have here, particularly to deal with safety issues on the bridges and the two intersections, priority intersections that were raised by the Ottawa South Community Association.
Carried.
Yeah.
It's a horror show down there.
Yeah.
We don't have a map, but basically it's from when you went on Riverside and you turn to go over the Billings Bridge, you get to Riverdale, so it would be from that point all the way up to just before the Queensway to the north. It's sort of the commercial district of the area. I mean, you got the Old Ottawa South, and then you got the Glebe business district. So, I mean, the traveling speeds within those areas for the majority of the day are quite low because of the parking utilization. Even in the peak periods, there's enough traffic, and the speeds are in that range of 45 to 50. So, signing it to 40 is not a concern from our perspective.
Once again, legal is catching me at the corner line. It seems the questions from Councillor Deans provoke legal. So maybe we could hear from you.
Thank you, Chair. This is just with regard to the procedural matter, and so as I understand it, the motion carried, which means it was unanimous, so that's fine. And this really is just by way of a procedural footnote to say that's good, that was appropriate, because I had chatted with Ms. Donnelly as well as with Mr. Mark about this issue, and it's just that because the motion was not directly related to the report in the sense that it is speaking about a specific measure which staff are supportive of, which the Ottawa Sports and Entertainment Group are supportive of, but nevertheless doesn't arise directly out of the report. It just needed the 2/3 vote to get onto the agenda to be passed.
Fair enough, and it hasn't carried yet because Councillor Deans had asked for the map. So we can take a step backwards and have the vote as to whether to add it to the agenda. We had had this discussion earlier, but we thought we had cleared it up. Carried? Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
And now we'll focus on the substantive motion, and Councillor Dean says another question.
So basically, we're talking about sort of just from the Billings Bridge to the Queensway, that section of Bank Street, reduced to 40. What's the current speed limit?
Currently, it's 50. It's unsigned 50.
And is 40 warranted?
At this point, we haven't done studies recently. The last one was in 2010, and the average speeds were 42, 41, and the 85th percentile was 48 and 40. So it's in that range. So again, from our perspective, the speed limit, if it's 50, 40, people are going to travel what they're comfortable at, and it's within the mid-40s to 40. So the speed limit of 40 or the speed limit of 50, from our perspective, is not a concern.
And will there be enforcement? Are there opportunities for enforcement in that corridor?
Again, the 85th percentile is 48 kilometers an hour, so I'm not speaking out of terms with the police, but they normally try to identify locations with a higher differentiation between what the speed limit is and what the actual speeds are.
Thank you.
Councillor Huber.
Thank you. Mr. Landry, doesn't your area have reports that say that we get a better compliance if it's a realistic speed? So most of our roads are already 50 kilometers an hour. Is that not correct?
That's correct. As you get closer to what the operating speeds are, you get better compliance. So
in effect, we're creating a speed trap here.
Not necessarily, because here the speeds are quite low. If you think during the, even the peaks and during, like on a Saturday or even during the weekday, you've got parking, so Bank Street's really one lane. You've got cars turning at intersections. So, like I said, our spot speed surveys that were done in 2010 indicate the average speeds are 42. So it's not like we're at a location where the speeds, the speed limit is 40, but the operating speeds are 60. That would be more of a concern than this road where, we're talking about in the same range. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, discussion on the motion? Carried. No, I realize that, Councillor Hubie. Councillor Chernyshenko, you wanted to speak to the matter?
To the main subject now, yes, thank you very much. I did write up some comments, so I won't have to give you any of the background of the LTAC and the issues which you're pretty well versed in here on Transportation Committee. I just wanted to focus on a couple of key items, the where next, the things that we can still do to make a difference. The goal that I think everyone shared from the outset, an enjoyable and efficient trip that does not harm the quality of life of adjacent residents. And that's key, because this isn't just about major events. This is about an ongoing, day-to-day new situation. Certainly, the Glebe, Old Ottawa South, closest to Lansdowne Park, they're busy parts of town. The roads are busy, always have been. Parking is extremely well used. What we're introducing through the new Lansdowne is such a level of activity on a daily basis that has become the major concern for people who live in the area, for the businesses that operate there, and for the institutions. We still have representative here with the Glebe Centre, Abbotsford House, etc., when it comes to parking on their streets. So a solution here, there is more than one solution. A solution for getting to the games can be all about get everybody on a shuttle bus, make it really difficult to drive. There's another way to get here. That isn't the same solution on a daily basis. What we have to keep into account is there are residents who own homes, as we've heard, often do not have driveways, who have counted on on-street parking forever, and are now being told that a number of times of the day, on your own street, you're unlikely to be able to find parking, because we've entered into an agreement that effectively assumed that a lot of that space would be made available for Lansdowne goers. There's our real challenge. How do we protect the rights, if you would like to call it, the assumption that when you live in an area in this city, you will have certain space parking privileges available to you, and they won't be taken away just because we have a new facility that we want to succeed. It's a challenge. There's no easy answer in this. But as we've heard, the parking issue has come up already, including my own colleagues understanding this concern. I believe we have to find a way in which we can protect some space, not all the street. No one was saying no visitors can park on our streets, but rather, how can I, if I live on Homewood, Adelaide, if I volunteer at or work at the Glebe Centre back on Monk or another street, how can I know that generally I'll be able to find a parking spot? It won't always be taken up by a Lansdowne customer. And I think we can still work within that to create some kind of those reserved zones. So that's something I would still like to keep working on. We knew from the outset there would be no sweeping solutions. You know, no subway running to Lansdowne, no LRT. It was going to have to be a solution of many small solutions. You'll see in the appendices of what I gave you the list of sort of priority items that we came up with. I just want to focus on a couple of them right now where I think we can still make a real difference. First one I've already just covered now, implementing more restrictive parking policies or limits on some residential streets closest to Lansdowne following a public petition process. Not residents only, but yes, some spaces at any time for residents. The other one that's already got a lot of endorsement from the community reps that you've heard from is building that bridge over the canal as soon as possible. I'm glad to say it's in the Transportation Master Plan. The detailed design is underway. But the reason why I feel this is so essential is we have to create new ways into the Glebe, new ways into Lansdowne that aren't bank-centric. Everything is so dependent on Bank Street that an opportunity to bring people in from another direction is so essential. And that is one which is key. It means that the rail service that gets you to the new Lee's Confederation line stop, or a shuttle coming in from another direction in town that can get you to Main Street and drop you off so that you can take that 6 to 8 block walk over the bridge and into Lansdowne, that becomes realistic and attractive. And it means you can say to your friends and family going to the game or going shopping, the movies, let's not deal with Bank Street. And it will be a realistic option to do that. So I'm counting on us working together to find ways to move that up. It is a big ticket item. I know we're having issues right now with pedestrian cycling bridges, but we've done them well before, and I know we can do them well again. We're working out how to do that. And the final one I'll bring up right now is improving bike safety on the Bank Street Bridge through piloting another way to work with those lanes. The challenge is this. It is a heritage bridge. There's only 4 lanes of traffic. It is not wide enough to put in full-fledged bicycle lanes. That's why after more than several decades of a very high cycling population, we still haven't solved it. The only way we're going to be able to create the space for proper bike lanes is to take some space away from vehicle traffic. That could either be on a permanent basis, one less lane, or it could be some sort of a flexible basis. While construction has been going on this last while, that bridge has effectively been reduced from 4 lanes to 3 by reallocating, by using bollards and cones. It has almost always worked, and when it hasn't, it's usually because there's a big crane or a number of trucks lined up to get into Lansdowne. I believe we can find a way to work with those lanes on that bridge and maybe have a fallback game time situation where we alter the way those lanes are allocated, so we can have the day-to-day, very cycling-friendly allocation of the bridge, but at game time, we may be saying to cyclists, like a lot of pedestrians, getting over the bridge, you may have to walk or come in another route so that we can get our shuttle buses in. I understand we're going to have a very high need to move buses on that bridge during major events. but I think we can find a solution that accomplishes both of those. Otherwise, we have a huge pent-up demand. I hear it all the time in my community. I love to cycle, but getting over that bridge into the glebe continues to scare me. And I'm sure we can fix it with the good minds here. That's my summary. I've focused on those key items as ones that I think we can still solve. I know we here today as a committee don't have the ability to pass the funding of that bridge over the canal, but I wanted to, or any of these measures, I wanted to put those out there as key steps that I think we can still accomplish at this relatively late stage and make this the transportation solution that works for Lansdowne and the neighborhood. Thank you.
Councillor Hubley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question is to do with the report, and it's section 2.2.2, the condominium owners transit pass usage. It's page 13. Who's paying for those passes?
That is OSAG that will be paying for those passes.
So not the city's taxpayers?
Not the city. That is an obligation that was set out through the TDM plan as one of the TDM initiatives that would be the not OSAG, but sorry, it would be Trinity Residential.
Okay.
Or Minto Residential, sorry.
Thank you. It's not clear in the report, but that makes a big difference. So thank you very much.
Councillor Clark.
But you hear it. But in the small booklet that arrived on my email this morning from Councillor Chernyshenko, he's got measures the city has responded to positively in which some work is underway. I'd change the order to put the pedestrian canal bridge first. That's my bias. I agree, though, with most of them, so that my concerns are that boy, do we have a system here, don't we? No, I think this whole thing needs tolerance on everybody's part, and I've seen a lot of evidence of the tolerance from the partnership and from staff. What I haven't seen is some of these things concretely dealt with. Clearly, the Clay Street Bridge is on the they call it the do list for the budgetary stuff. I'd be a little concerned about the Bank Street Bridge. If you lower the lane capacity, you create a shuttle bus problem. If you have a shuttle bus only lane, it's possible that might work. I don't know. Somebody needs to look at these things. Is it possible to reconfigure the Bank Street Bridge to make one vehicular traffic lane and the other lanes for cycling and shuttle bus?
The challenge, especially when there's an event, is that we need, if we want traffic to flow on Bank Street, and also buses, because there may not be all of them stopping at the Lansdowne, we need that additional lane. And so we need, again, in both directions. It's also over the longer term. We have reconstruction starting up on Main Street, and so traffic's going to need to go somewhere if they're going downtown, even once it's
You're going to send them up Bank Street, okay.
Well, no, they're going to take different alternatives, but again, one of them is going to be Bank Street, and I know in studies that were done for the Main Street, there was an assumption that some of that traffic would divert there, and being down to one lane, you're getting to be in overcapacity, which can be a challenge. And then after Main Street, you're going to have Bronson being rebuilt. So it's very challenging that there's only a certain number of roadways that get to people downtown, and by further restricting them, it becomes more challenging.
Well, my concern is that the safety issues surrounding Bank Street Bridge, both in terms of the configuration flying over the hill or somebody coming up over the hill, are somewhat significant. I think that my concerns are that if we're going to eventually have a cycling network, that we need to figure out how to get across that barrier. And I'm sure that the road width is an issue, just like on the Cummings Bridge, same problem. And I think there are some solutions, but at the moment, the Bank Street Bridge, to my mind, is an important consideration. Somehow or other it has to work for event days, and for non-event days, perhaps maybe we put up bollards and make them go to a single lane. I don't know. It doesn't have to be always 4-lane capacity, and you could have temporary capacity restraints for the call it off event day thing.
Well, the challenge is then becoming how do you convert from an off day to an event day, and with pavement markings and...
It's called orange and black circular...
They are, but then...
Have you seen them?
Oh, I've seen a few. But no, it just becomes a challenge, and who's going to take care of that? Who's going to change them?
Oh, clearly, Larry will take care of it.
Who? Sorry. Larry, of course.
Thank you, Councillor.
You asked the question, I answered.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I'm going to remind committee members that we're here to discuss the information report, which is about how the committee was constituted, how it's going to be constituted going forward, and what its mandate is, as opposed to getting into each individual recommendation. Councillor Deans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I have to say I'm happy to hear how much effort is going into this by the community, by the representatives, by city staff, by OSEG. I think that's very important. And I'm really especially happy to hear that you're learning from the problems that other municipalities have experienced in delivering these, because I think there are lessons to be learned and no point reinventing the wheel. And in the case of Winnipeg, I know they're different. I'm fairly familiar with the makeup of that city. So Pembina Highway is very different than Bank Street. But also, one of the things that happened there is they didn't take into account, as I understand it, the number of people traveling to that South End destination that weren't going to the game. They had classes at the University of Manitoba, it's a pretty large university, scheduled at the same time, and they didn't add those into the numbers. So for learning from the lessons, there will also be a 10-screen theater at Lansdowne Park, and there will also be a number of other events or venues that will be attracting traffic as well. So how refined are our numbers? When you look at game day estimates, do you look at just the people attending? Do you look at the traffic expectation that's coming into the glebe for other reasons? Do you look at the multi-modes and how those are breaking down? How much number crunching have we done?
Mr. Chairman, we've done extensive number crunching, and the original transportation impact assessment study that was undertaken along with the TDM plan that laid out the overall strategy, it looked at day-to-day when there's no events happening. It looked at the events, but in addition to looking at events, it also looked at the level of activity that would be associated with the other things that are happening on site. So all of these things were in fact factored in. As committee may recall, it was an incredibly detailed report. The data that supported that report was compiled in an appendix document that was probably 2 inches thick. That report was peer-reviewed by 2 peer reviewers and was deemed to be very much in accord with accepted transportation impact analysis practices and was ultimately accepted. But the terms of reference for the McCormick-Rankin study was making sure that there was a complete and full picture that would be looked at and evaluated and analyzed, and it's from that the transportation strategy grew as well, so very comprehensive.
So what's the first game day?
July 18th.
July 18th. Are you going to test drive this strategy with a smaller event first? Like, is there like a smaller concert or anything that's going to occur in that stadium first, just to see how the traffic flows before the first big game day?
We'll be doing a lot of work in advance of that date to ensure that everything works. There'll be a series of soft openings that we can test a number of the assumptions on. Those plans are in process now.
So what kind of soft openings? Like how big? How many people?
We haven't finalized all those plans yet, but it's normal when you open a venue that you test your different elements of the venue, from traffic to food and beverage to washrooms, everything. So we'll have events that the general public will be able to use and come to the venue prior to the 18th of July as a way to test, and they're called soft openings.
Did Winnipeg do that?
I'm sure they did. I don't know specifically, but we're working on those plans now.
Right. Okay. Mr. Manconi?
Well, I just want to add in that the studies that were done by McCormick Rankin are really a starting point and a baseline. We're going to continue to try and learn from Winnipeg. We're working with OC Transpo and OSEG to actually go out and to start to survey the residents. Where are they going to be on that first football game? Are they going to be staying at work and traveling right to the game? So there's a whole series of questions and work that the transition team, City and OSEG are doing. But the city brings its resources, and OSEG is bringing theirs to the forefront to try and tackle all of these issues with the Site Link Network. How are we going to have one comprehensive communication plan to speak about how you're getting to Lansdowne? All of these things are really coming together quickly, and they're going to start to roll out in the coming months.
How many cycling parking spots do we have?
On site?
On site, I believe there's 450 permanent, but when there's major events that are happening, depending on the scale of the event, there will be bike parking corrals, so similar to what you see at the Blues Fest, LeBreton Flats, where it's actual secure bike parking, and the cost for that is also embedded in the ticket price. So a patron attending an event, there would be no fee. I mean, at Blues Fest, you actually have to pay to park in the bike parking corral. That won't be the case here. So that'll be dependent on event size, and I think as OSAG indicated, I mean, I'll let them speak to it, but as I heard it, the intent is to make sure that we have not just what's identified as required through the transportation strategy work, but to go beyond that, that's the minimum.
Okay, because we have Mr. Trudell said that Winnipeg didn't believe their numbers, so they just didn't do it. So we're accommodating all expectations of that modal split.
Absolutely, and like John said, we want to provide more than that, so that if we do get even more than what's projected by the experts, that we'll be able to satisfy it.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Okay. Seeing none, then report received. Further questions?
Yeah, just one question on the. I want to clarify on the parking permit situation. I understand that the impediment that we hear is that our agreements are dependent on a certain number of on-street spaces being available. But as I understand it, if the existing condition is residents who own cars already park there when they can and occasionally have visitors, and our studies that led to this agreement with OSEG looked at those numbers and concluded how many available spaces there still are. It's not that we would be contravening that agreement if we simply created a type of permit that allowed local residents, instead of searching all over the neighborhood to try and find a spot, to actually go somewhere knowing there would be space. We wouldn't actually be taking space away from the agreement to OSEG. We would just be, if you want to say, creating some sort of different status for it. And is there not some way we can do that recognizes if you own a house and you've got a car and you've been counting on on-street parking, that you should be allowed to keep doing that and not have to look 8 blocks away just because we've opened Lansdowne? Can we not find a solution there? And as you know, Phil, we've been talking about this for a long time, still trying to find one.
Yeah, and the challenge is a roadway is a public roadway, so the Highway Traffic Act doesn't allow us to reserve spots on the public right-of-way for anybody. So it's sort of like first come, first serve. One of the things that, in the review and talking with OSEG, one of the assumptions was for, day-to-day, is that there's no requirement for parking in the community, that all the parking demand can be accommodated within the existing parking structures has been built for Lansdowne. So the petition process, although it doesn't go to 10 or 11 o'clock at night like had been requested, we can go through the petition process from Monday to Friday from 7 in the morning till 6 at night to change regulations if that's what residents on those streets want. But to go and to do a special permit to reserve a certain spot on a street, that's just not allowed, and that's more of a provincial
Well, I understand that because we have been through that, and I'm sensing, in fact, I know this isn't the right place to keep having this debate. Am I correct that this is an ongoing dialogue and we might still be able to find a solution to this outside of today's meeting, and that you and other staff are still open to talking through how we might be able to make this work without running into the agreements that the city signed with OSEG as an impediment?
Well, if it's an impacted day-to-day, then, like I said, we can look at changing parking based on what the community wants. With regards to reserving spots or some sort of permit, we just have to be able to ensure that we can follow the existing rules within the Highway Traffic Act.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, we'll try this again. Are there any other questions for staff or for OSEG representatives? Okay, seeing none. Report received?
Received.
Okay. Okay. Any notice of motion for consideration in subsequent meetings?
Did we hear all the delegations?
We did. Any inquiries? Motion for adjournment?
Carried.
Okay, thank you. Our next meeting is Thursday, April the 10th.
Should have heard me tap dancing on should have heard me tap dancing on CBC radio yesterday afternoon.
I never listened to CBC.
So, is someone going to get fired? It's too early to say. So, who's responsible? What's going to happen? It's too early to say.
They were in the room. They were in the room.
You know, it's great to fire someone, but we have to fix the process. That's the more important.
That's the more important.
Yeah, we can fire as many people as we want, but if we don't fix the process.
But there will be
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying there won't be. I'm not
There's just
saying.
too many things.
But right now, with the construction season 6 weeks from now, we have to.